Good afternoon. It is 1 p.m. and the inquiry is resumed. My name is Rekha Sabu. I am a planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry. This is the final day of the inquiry. Usual reminders: mobile phones and electronic devices switch to silent, please. The bathrooms are located through the corridor to my right. Are we expecting a fire drill this afternoon?
It's already been done.
Oh, it's been done. And fire exits are through the door to my left. I will aim for a break mid-afternoon. And today we will hear closing submissions and anything left on the costs application. I received yesterday the revised wording of condition 34 that was discussed. I also received the Residents' Alliance response to the Section 106 and the updated Section 106 from the appellant. When can we have that signed and sent in? 5 p.m. 3rd of June should give you 2 weeks.
It will be within that time, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Semakula, you'd indicated that you had intended to submit a legal submission. I haven't received them yet.
Yes, Madam, I will send that through the actual judgment to the programme. Also, it was sent over to the advocates last night, so everyone knows what the document is, and they have the judgment. It will make sure you have that too.
Okay.
I think it's been sent through as well to your programme officer.
Oh, okay. It's not gone through to me yet. Mr. Chung, you had also indicated that you were going to provide a legal submission.
I can't recall whether, I think there's one case that we've referred to, right? And that's been shared with the other parties, and we can let you have a copy as well.
Okay. I've seen the appellant's costs application. Do we have a response or?
Yes, I certainly will. I have a list of various points. Ma'am, if you'll indulge me, I'll get through them all at once. I'm instructed on to do with the unilateral undertaking, of course, appreciating it's a unilateral undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
I do have instructions on the phasing provision that's in dispute. I'm told that the council solicitor has pointed out that because there's no certainty over what conditions will be imposed, the reason that's the omission of the phasing provision within the UU is not accepted is because that's desired. And while we accept, of course, it doesn't make sense to have two processes for phasing, not least because of the potential for conflict. There is a blue pencil clause within the UU. So in the event that the phasing condition is imposed, that blue pencil clause can just mean the phasing provisions within the UU can be struck out if they remain in the latest edition. As to Schedule 2 of the UU, as I understand it, I'm very glad Mr. DeCalco is here. The original condition was to have the link delivered prior to occupation, excuse me, closing. The original condition was to have the link delivered before occupation of the western parcel. And so the council maintains that the route should be delivered prior to first occupation of the western parcel, and that giving the funds prior to commencement of the 140th dwelling would not achieve that aim. Again, appreciating its unilateral undertaking, I think that's as far as we can take that. Condition 34, the council has, very helpfully, the case officer has appended to the table that was initially circulated with the revised wording, the council's response to that. I have no idea. It sounds like that hasn't reached you with the two side by side, for which I apologize, and hopefully that can be circulated to Mr. Brown this afternoon. And then finally, but not least, the cost application. Ma'am, I've only received that this morning, and there were a lot of moving pieces to get through. I've managed to draft 2 paragraphs in response to that so far. It's not ideal to leave things hanging over, obviously, but given that the sums involved could well mean an entire person's annual salary, if not more, we would submit that's not something to be rushed. I would request more time. My proposed timetable, so that this is dealt with as expeditiously as possible, is that there's some more overnight drafting tonight. I get that to the those instructing me tomorrow morning. They take tomorrow to urgently consider it all and elevate that to the necessary levels. I then amend and recirculate it overnight tomorrow for approval, final approval first thing Friday morning. And then given the potential time to negotiate final details that might be needed, the local council would, or sorry, the local planning authority would circulate that through the case officer and all parties Friday at 11 a.m. And then the appellant would have until Friday, I would suggest 4 p.m. To make their reply to our reply, if that's amenable to them. So that's the full list of everything that I've got on my plate this morning, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chung, how does that timescale sound to you?
Yes, certainly. I'll start with the costs first. I have no objection to the extra time that the council want to respond to the costs. It's of course a matter entirely for you in terms of timescales. We can manage to respond by Friday 4 p.m. if we have it by 11 a.m. 11 a.m. So yes, that's fine by us. In terms of the UU and condition 34, first of all, I've not seen the council's response to condition 34, so I can't comment further on that. As far as the UU is concerned, that part of it which relates to condition 34, I believe the UU has been amended to make sure the council get the contribution for the improvement works to Shrubbery Grove Plantation by commencement of the 100th dwelling, I believe, on the western parcel, and that we say should be ample time. No, not the 100th dwelling on the western parcel, but the 100th dwelling full stop. 100th dwelling full stop. So we would still be building out the eastern parcel, and we wouldn't even move to the western parcel before they have that contribution. That should be ample time for them to use the money to make sure the link is delivered, especially when we think through that by that point, it would have long since become clear that we were unable to do anything through condition 34, and they would already have set the wheels in motion to actually deliver the works. So it's simply a question of getting the money, and they'll have the money well in advance. The other UU points that my learned friend has raised, I think, are for Mrs. Els. I think some of them have been responded to by Mrs. Els, but I'll let her respond to those.
Sorry, before you respond, can I make sure the council have seen the latest?
I suspect we
UU?
have, ma'am. I apologize for not being abreast of that. Thank you for that update. We'll check in the background. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really in relation to the phasing plan. Our direction is really to remove it and not to repeat the conditions that we've discussed to date. Having the phasing plan as a condition, it means that it can be varied, it can be amended, and it's much more effective than retaining it within the section 106 unilateral. So currently the draft unilateral as a final version does not propose a phasing requirement, or the phasing plan, sorry.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And everyone has seen the closing submission from Mr. Hall? Yeah. Is there anything anyone would like to raise before I hear closing submissions?
Just one thing, ma'am. There was a discussion yesterday around additional wording regarding conditions 34 and 35 coming from the Residents Alliance. Having received Mr. Chung's revised wording, that has now been sent to all parties and sent over to you. There's nothing else that needs to be done on that. You have our suggested wording, and you can take from that what you will.
Anything about condition 34, either from the council or from my learned friend, Mr. Samakula. I don't know what's happened there, but if we could have a copy, that would be.
I'll check that, Mr. Chung.
I don't think I have either. I'm sure that's said through, please. Yeah.
I'm instructed it's gone through to Kurt.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, if there's nothing else, it's pinned in to
Sorry.
your closing submission.
As ever, Mr. Connell's being extremely helpful and we'll circulate that. Sorry, that being the written copy of the closing submissions.
Okay.
I suspect there'll be more of that to come. It's been a long night. Okay, I'll wait till you have a copy, ma'am.
Yeah. And I've just got through the Residents Alliance's finish 34 and 35. Thank you. And Mr. Chung, once you've got that, I'll give you an opportunity if you want to respond.
So sorry, ma'am, the condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just arrived, but I'll concentrate on what's happening at the moment and then go back to condition 34.
So, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. These are the closing submissions on behalf of North Hertfordshire District Council, and they are in support of its refusal of outline planning permission for residential development at Land Off Barkway Road, Royston. The main matters in issue between the council and the appellant are whether the proposal would provide adequate opportunity for residents and visitors to travel by non-car modes, and whether any material considerations, including the provision of housing, warrant a decision other than in accordance with the development plan. An issue has also been raised as to the council's decision the effect on Therfield Heath site of special scientific interest, the SSSI, would be adequately mitigated. The council's position on each of these matters will be set out in turn. Starting with the first issue, the proposal would not provide adequate opportunity for travel by residents and visitors by non-car transport modes. The site, if developed, would fail to provide adequate opportunity for travel by non-car modes, contrary to NPPF paragraphs 110 and 115 and policy SP9. The transport case turns on the quality of the proposed active travel links. Policy SP9 requires strategic master plans and significant developments to create integrated, accessible, and sustainable transport systems with walking, cycling, and public transport designed to be the most attractive modes, and to provide a clear hierarchy of pedestrian-friendly streets and well-connected footpaths and cycleways that integrate with the wider area. Policy SP9 is supported by national guidance. It is agreed Not sure this is the... Ma'am, I'm just going to double check this is the right version. I do apologize. Right. I'm not sure how that happened. Ma'am, this is not the final version. I am very, very sorry about that. I genuinely have no idea how that happened. Would you bear with me one moment? Yes, we have it here. We'll just print it off immediately. And I'm so very sorry to everybody.
Okay, the inquiry is resumed. Lyndon?
Thank you, ma'am. And hopefully you have right in front of you the, you do have the correct copy. Hopefully it is right in front of you.
Okay.
I don't propose to repeat everything I've said. It was just formatting amendments to paragraph 4. So I'll pick up there. And that's on page 2. The transport case turns on the quality of the proposed sustainable travel links. This is not a minor consequential matter. It is a fundamental matter of policy compliance. Both the development plan and NPPF confirm in unequivocal terms that early consideration of sustainable travel links is required. To paraphrase the NPPF, sustainable travel is a priority. It is agreed that it is good transport planning to both consider and implement sustainable travel infrastructure at the earliest reasonable opportunity. Policy SP9 requires strategic master plans and significant developments to create integrated, accessible, and sustainable transport systems, with walking, cycling, and public transport designed to be the most attractive modes and to provide a clear hierarchy of pedestrian-friendly streets and well-connected footpaths and cycleways that integrate with the wider area. Policy SP9 is supported by national guidance. It is agreed the attractiveness of a cycle route will affect whether users choose cycling as a means of transport. So, has the appellant proposed a scheme that, to quote Policy SP9, creates integrated, accessible, and sustainable transport systems, with walking, cycling, and public transport designed to be the most attractive forms of transport and effectively linking into the surrounding areas? No, they have not. First, because the appellant's case relies on a footway cycleway connection to Shrubbery Grove via land within town council ownership, the Green Walk Plantation, where there is no agreement or commitment securing that land and no assured delivery mechanism. Generally, deliverability can be a material consideration if it is relevant to the planning merits of a proposal. This is not an issue between the parties. I may need to add, so far as I'm aware, ma'am. The appellant will rely on the decision of Warwick County Council ex parte Powergen to argue that deliverability here is not a valid concern because you, ma'am, can rely on the County Council to carry out the necessary works. It is necessary to first explain what Powergen is all about. This case concerned the refusal of a local highway authority to enter into an agreement under Section 278 of the Highways Act 1980 for highway works required to implement a planning permission after the authority's objections, particularly on road safety grounds, had been fully considered and rejected in a planning appeal heard by an independent inspector. The Court of Appeal held that while local highway authorities enjoyed a wide discretion under Section 278 to enter into such agreements only where they are satisfied it would benefit the public, this discretion is strictly limited where the relevant public interest issues, such as road safety, have already been adjudicated independently as part of the planning process and resolved in the developer's favor. In such circumstances, it was unreasonable and unlawful for the highway authority to maintain its objections and refuse to cooperate. The inspector's independent factual judgment, made after due process, should be regarded as determinative unless there are genuinely new circumstances which could reasonably be said to undermine the basis of that decision. The authority's refusal to enter into an agreement in these circumstances was found to be irrational and unlawful, exceeding the bounds of Wednesbury reasonableness. The doctrine has since been applied in planning and local government cases, setting a precedent that where a competent authority has made a formal decision affecting private rights, that decision is binding on other involved authorities unless there is significant change in circumstances undermining the original decision. An authority acting inconsistently with such a decision or seeking to undermine or impede its implementation for the same reasons already independently adjudicated will be acting unreasonably and unlawfully. Similarly, another case is relied on in this respect. Crown and Cardiff County Council ex parte Sears Group Properties Limited. In this case, planning permission had been granted by the local planning authority following consultation with the local highway authority, who had advised that a signalised junction would accommodate the demand and flows likely to be generated by the proposed development. However, there had been a substantial lapse of time since that advice had been given, and it was claimed that there had been a significant worsening of traffic conditions at a roundabout affected by the development. The local highway authority resolved to defer signing a Section 278 agreement until an updated traffic impact analysis had been submitted. The specific resolution of the committee was that the officers be authorized to enter into a Section 278 agreement in respect of the subject site, but in respect of another affected site, a Section 278 agreement should be deferred until an updated traffic impact analysis had been submitted. The claimant sought judicial review of that resolution. The appellant will likely cite what he then was, Mr. Justice Carnwath, said at pages 272 and 273. Ma'am, given the local residents here today, I propose to actually read this all out in full. So I quote from the judgment: "It is, in my view, possible to discern in the cases a broad principle, subject to variations in detail, that where a formal decision has been made on a particular subject matter or issue affecting private rights by a competent public authority, that decision will be regarded as binding on other authorities directly involved, unless and until circumstances change in a way which can be reasonably found to undermine the basis of the original decision. That change may be a change in the factual circumstances or something in the underlying policies affecting the decision. However it is put, it seems to me," this is the judge, "that underlying all of those approaches is the common sense view that in the public sphere, once the matter has been formally decided, it should stay decided until circumstances change in some material respect." End quote. In both of these cases, the recalcitrant party was the local highways authority. The works in issue were to take place on the highway network, notwithstanding the private rights referred to in Cardiff County Council, and the legal framework concerned compliance with a public body's statutory functions. Importantly, the private rights referred to in the decision under challenge in Cardiff County Council did not concern works on private land. They related to the deferral of progress on a site until an updated traffic impact analysis had been submitted. In neither of the cases relied on, Powergen and Cardiff County Council, does the court go so far as to hold that a decision to grant planning permission under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 overrides private land rights, which is what is at issue in relation to the Town Council's land ownership of the Greenwalk Plantation. If such a radical consequence followed, then there would be no reason for anyone to ever undergo the compulsory purchase process. Anyone could just secure planning permission, and it should be noted anyone is entitled to apply for permission for any land, whether or not they hold any rights in relation to it, which provides for works over any land which they could then compel. That is not what the law allows. The line of authorities relied on by the appellant essentially follows the line of jurisprudence, requiring that public decision makers act consistently and rationally. One public body should not frustrate the decision of another public body. The current situation must be distinguished. It is up to the town council to determine how it uses its land. It cannot be compelled to cut down its trees or sacrifice its land, whether by planning permission, condition Section 106, payment, or any other mechanism under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. The only mechanism to compel this is through the complex compulsory purchase framework, as set out under the Acquisition of Land Act 1981, the Compulsory Purchase Act 1965, the Land Compensation Act 1961 and 1973, and the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. Insofar as the appellant relies on the scope for the County Council to compulsorily purchase the Town Council's land to carry out works to Greenwalk Plantation under the unilateral undertaking, the inquiry does not have the benefit of the Highway Authority's presence to seek evidence on this point directly. In these circumstances, the Council can only ask the inspectors to contemplate how reasonable it is that the Highways Authority would take such a draconian step as to acquire land compulsorily, and how reasonable it is that they could both carry out the CPO process and deliver the works for £49,500. Given the importance in policy terms of the provision of sustainable transport links, this uncertainty over delivery is material to the decision. It weighs heavily against the grant of permission because there is no guarantee there will be a dedicated and attractive cycle route connecting the site to Royston. Second, turning to what is actually proposed, the Shrubbery Grove route fails to provide an inclusive, attractive, and genuine choice of transport by non-card modes to all users. Mr. Hegarty identified that the proposed Shrubbery Grove link, as shown in the reference drawing, incorporates design elements fundamentally incompatible with accessible cycling and walking, including steps, staggered barriers, substandard widths across most of its length, steep longitudinal gradients, and an absence of lighting. LTN 120 sets out the core principles that should guide the provision of cycle infrastructure, and I quote, "Networks and routes should be coherent, direct, safe, comfortable, and attractive. The need for inclusive design runs through all 5 principles." What constitutes a coherent route is agreed. Routes should not have barriers or sudden gaps. What is proposed here is cited in the guidance as exactly the kind of route that is not coherent. And I quote, "Steps on a cycle route will render the whole journey inaccessible for some people." End quote. Such a route is not coherent. Steps on a cycle route also, and I quote, "do not meet accessibility standards." The guidance tells us accessibility, quote, "is a requirement that should always be considered in relation to each of the principles." The comfort of a cycling route means that it should be a good quality route. It is agreed the adequate width of a route is important for comfort. Most of the proposed shared use cycle path is between 2 and 2.4 meters wide, below the desirable 3-meter width advised for up to 300 cyclists per peak hour, and contrary to the guidance, an additional 0.5-meter buffer should be added adjacent to fences and hedges. It is also contrary to the guidance that the greater width is needed where cyclists are negotiating gradients, because gradients mean cyclists will deviate more from a straight line to maintain balance. The gradient itself is also a significant issue in comfort, accessibility, inclusivity, and attractiveness terms. The guidance tells us that for routes at a 5% gradient, the maximum desirable length at that level of gradient is 30 meters. The vertical alignment of the Shrubbery Grove link features long sections at around 10% gradient. Overall, it averages out at a 7 to 8% gradient along its entire 80-meter length. The route passes through largely unoverlooked woodland and is proposed to be unlit. For obvious reasons, LTN 120 recommends lighting for cycle routes. The lack of lighting reduces the attractiveness of the route. For some, if not most users, perceived safety is reduced and actual safety is reduced as collision risks are exacerbated by the design during darkness. It is agreed that low light levels could affect users of the route's actual and perceived safety. It is perfectly obvious that the route not only does not, it cannot meet the standards set out in national guidance. These are not minor deviances from the ideal. Having explored the extent of the departures, what is proposed is clearly contrary to the very core principles that guide the provision of sustainable travel links. The scheme proposed does not comply with the core principles underlying 1. Coherent, 2. Safe, 3. Comfortable, 4. Attractive, and 5. Accessible design. There can be no question this is not good enough. It is not an accessible and sustainable transport route designed to be the most attractive form of transport. It does not offer a genuine choice of transport mode for all users, and it is not suitable access by sustainable means precisely because it deviates so greatly from current national guidance. Alternative options were examined, as Mr. Frisbee said, I quote him, "at length," but were variously discounted due to design constraints, including topography, lack of available land, and the knock-on effect on existing vegetation. It is worth commenting that the very length of time over which the sustainable transport links were considered, debated, iterated again and again, yet remained unresolved is a strong indication of the difficulty in ever providing a satisfactory route. A remedy for the acknowledged defects through an acceptable compromise, despite efforts over years and years, has not materialized. Simply saying it can be left to condition, given the agreed importance in planning policy terms of having a satisfactory, sustainable transport route, is not an appropriate approach. The troubles encountered by the appellant here can be assumed likely to continue under any form of condition requiring yet another design to be submitted. What is proposed is not good enough, and there is no likelihood that something can be proposed which is good enough. These constraints, this difficulty, and the resulting uncertainty matter. National and local policy require that development provides a genuine, not merely theoretical, and attractive choice of non-car modes of travel. If the Shrubbery Grove route does not come forward or is not attractive to users, For whatever reason, the cycle route is along Barkway Road. Does this default offer a genuine choice of transport modes? No. The notion of using Barkway Road as the sole sustainable travel link was considered a non-starter by the Highways Authority long ago, back in 2022. Barkway Road is steep, it is long, it is narrowed by parked cars, it can be congested, and it cannot be improved by the addition of a segregated cycle lane. These factors do not present an attractive proposition to cyclists. A single, very unattractive option is not a genuine choice. The development would function as a car-dependent enclave. In these circumstances, policy SP9 is breached, and the transport objectives set out in national policy under NPPF paragraphs 110 and 115 are not satisfied. Moving on to the effect of the proposal on the SSSI, and that would be mitigated. Mr. Connell confirmed that the Council and the appellant agreed a package comprising on-site provision of mitigation and a financial contribution of £350 per unit via Section 106, that should be unilateral undertaking, which is still compliant and would mitigate any potential effects on the SSSI. In his evidence, Mr. Connell explained there is an agreed submitted mitigation strategy, Natural England were consulted and agreed in principle, and the Council was content with the approach, treating it as mitigation rather than a freestanding benefit in the planning balance. To include an additional precautionary buffer, the appellant has increased the contribution to £500 per unit in the unilateral undertaking. It is evident that certainly now, the effect of the proposal on the SSSI would be mitigated. And finally, the final matter in issue, that no material considerations, including the provision of housing, warrant a decision other than in accordance with the development plan. The starting point remains the development plan. The NPPF as a material consideration cannot displace the law. The law requires that development proposals are determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The proposed development conflicts with the development plan when it is read as a whole, and no material considerations indicate a departure from the development plan are warranted under the tilted balance. Policy SP5 operates a general policy of restraint in line with the aim to steer development to sustainable locations. Policy CGB1 identifies limited exceptions which this development does not comply with. The site is outside Royston's settlement boundary, it is not allocated, and it is acknowledged to be in conflict with policies SP5 and CGB1. It is agreed the policies which are most important for determining the application are rendered out of date due to the housing land supply position. Ms. Else reduced the weight she gave to these policies on the basis the Council can presently demonstrate only a 2.6-year housing land supply. In response, Mr. Connell pointed out that they remain consistent with the NPPF. Moreover, he pointed out they were recently examined by an independent inspector through the local plan-making process, found to be sound, and that added to the weight to be attributed to these policies. Looking ahead at the prospect of the Council recovering their housing supply, Mr. Connell has noted that the Council has applied a flexible application of these policies several times where schemes are otherwise sustainable in recognition of the urgent need to provide housing. But this is not such a case. While housing need and delivery are important, Mr. Connell pointed out that this is not a numbers exercise. What is an issue here is the provision of a place to live forever for a substantial number of people. In pulling all the threads together, Mr. Connell attributed substantial weight to market and affordable housing, recognizing both the scale of the shortfall and past affordable delivery trends. In fact, he attributed greater weight to the elements relating to the delivery of housing than Ms. Else. Economic benefits were given moderate weight by Mr. Connell, consistent with the statement of common ground. You, ma'am, have a choice. Either prefer the evidence of what Ms. Else freely agreed with Mr. Connell in the planning statement of common ground, or prefer the subsequent unilateral evidence of Ms. Else that departs from that. A key function of a statement of common ground is to inform the preparation of proofs of evidence. The purpose, timing, and mutually agreed nature of the statement of common ground means that the evidence it contains should be preferred to Ms. Else's later reconsidered and amplified view. Ecological gains through biodiversity net gain and the provision for measures to improve species diversity and abundance on the site are given moderate positive weight in the planning balance. That was agreed. Mr. Connell cautioned against considering what is nothing more than mitigation as a benefit in the planning balance. The necessary mitigation for archaeology and healthcare warrant no more than neutral weight in the planning balance. That too was agreed. Similarly, the mitigation proposed for the highway network and SSSI warrant neutral wage. The landscaping, green infrastructure allotments, and new and improved footpaths all fall under the open space umbrella, to which the parties agree substantial weight should be given. The inspector, UMAM, should be wary of double counting in this respect. There is also common ground that the development would cause moderate harm through loss of agricultural land, including the loss of some best and most versatile agricultural land, and moderate landscape and visual harm judged at year 10. It is the transport harm which is so substantial as to justify refusal. Mr. Hegarty's evidence conclusion demonstrated that without secured and policy compliant sustainable transport infrastructure from the outset, the development would function as a car-based community, contrary to policy SP9 and NPPF paragraphs 110 and 115. His evidence was that even if it were delivered, the Shrubbery Grove Sustainable Travel Link in particular falls so materially short of LTN 120 guidance on accessibility, width, gradient, lighting, and overall design, that the development itself would not be acceptable in transport terms. All parties have proceeded on the basis that there would be an alternative sustainable travel link to Barkway Road. Yet all this time later, a final design for this link still remains outstanding. In the overall planning balance, the substantial benefits are fully recognised by the Council. But the specific and unremedied transport shortcomings, combined with the agreed moderate harms to landscape and best and most versatile agricultural land, significantly and demonstrably outweigh those benefits when assessed against the development plan and the framework as a whole. Mr. Connell concludes that the adverse impacts would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, such that the presumption does not assist the appellant. The development conflicts with policies SP5, SP9, and CGB1, and with NPPF paragraphs 110 and 115. The development is not acceptable in planning terms. To conclude, for these reasons, the Council invites UMAM to dismiss the appeal. The proposal fails to provide adequate opportunity for non-car travel, contrary to relevant transport policies in the NPPF, and the development plan policies, and is contrary to the development plan policies SP9, SP5, CGB1. There is no reason here to apply a flexible approach to policies SP5 and CGB1 where the development is not otherwise sustainable and acceptable in planning terms. In this case, no material consideration justify a decision other than in accordance with the development plan, as the planning harm significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I have got next on my schedule is closing submissions by the Conservators. Would you like to read that out, or are you happy for us to take it as read?
I think if everybody's got it, about the same time.
Yeah.
We've read it by now.
Okay, good. In that case, we can move straight on to closings by the Residents' Alliance. Mr. Semakula.
I understand there is a printing exercise currently being taken, so I think you should have a hard copy shortly. So if we could just take a moment for that to come into the room.
Yep, sure. Should we adjourn till 2? Okay.
Yes, that should work. Thank you, Mom.
It's 1:55. The inquiry is resumed. Mr. Semikin.
Madam, the Royston Town Residents Alliance invites you to dismiss this appeal on two independent but related grounds. First, the proposed development fails to provide adequate opportunity for non-car travel, contrary to paragraphs 115 and 117 of the MPPF and policies SP6, SP9, and T1 of the local plan. Second, the cumulative deficiencies in the appellant's transport evidence are so serious you cannot be satisfied that severe residual cumulative impacts on the highway network will not arise, thereby engaging paragraphs 116 and 118 of the MPPF and policies SP9 and T1 of the local plan. Either ground is sufficient to justify dismissal. Taken together, the case is even stronger. Starting first with the Highway Authority's withdrawal of objection. It's important, Madam, that you understand the history of the local highway authority's engagement with this application, because the appellant relies heavily upon that, the highway authority's eventual withdrawal of its objection. The County Council maintained a formal objection to this application until July 2025, period of over 4 years. In July 2022, the County Council objected because once it became apparent that Bridleway Royston 10 could not be upgraded to a 6-meter LTN 120 compliant corridor through the site to Grange Bottom, there was no suitable sustainable connection to the western parcel. It stated, without a good sustainable connection to encourage sustainable travel, it is considered that the impact of the development on the narrow Barkway Road corridor and the A10 gyratory will be too severe. The inspector will note the use of the word severe, which is the very test in MPPF paragraph 116. Now, the Highway Authority only withdrew its objection in July 2025 after the appellant submitted further technical work in that year, and that withdrawal was contingent upon the securing via Section 106 and conditions of a significant range of sustainable travel improvements, including, we say, the new footway, cycleway to Shrubbery Grove. However, the County Council acknowledged that the Shrubbery Grove route, as it stands, currently has shortcomings, and that a more acceptable route will be agreed further to the recommended condition, that being condition 7. We'll return to this further below. It's our submission that the Highway Authority was wrong to withdraw its objection. Ma'am, you're not bound by it. Mr. Frisbee is right to accept that while the local Highway Authority's view carries substantive weight, it's not determinative. If, on the examination of the evidence, you find that material uncertainties remain unresolved in the transport case, the LHA's withdrawal of objection does not prevent a finding of conflict with paragraph 116 and the other policies already mentioned. Turning now to the main issues. First, starting with non-car transport modes. Now, before examining the individual routes, it's important to be clear about the correct policy test. Now, Mr. Frisbee's proof sought to set a lower bar than that which the MPPF and local policy imposes. He states, the MPPF test is not that every resident can access every destination on foot or by cycle. It's whether the development provides adequate opportunity for non-car travel for those who can and choose to use it. That formulation does not appear in the MPPF. As Mr. Hayder explains in his evidence, that formulation contradicts paragraph 115B, which requires that safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved for all users. The correct question is not whether a fraction of the most able-bodied, like Mr. Frisbee, can physically manage the routes. It's whether the development provides a genuine choice of transport modes for all users, including those with disabilities and reduced mobility, such that sustainable transport modes are prioritized and are designed to be the most attractive forms of transport. I've listed out the relevant policies there. So it's not simply whether they can, but it's whether they will. And we therefore invite you to reject Mr. Frisbee's formulation and to apply the test as it's set out in the MPPF and in the local plan. We want to take a moment now to discuss the Shrubbery Grove link. Now, this link's important because our position is that it is required for compliance with SP9. We say that's consistent with Mrs. Els's all evidence, in which she said that the access and movement plan set out in the master plan framework, which includes the link, was a key part of how the appellant demonstrated compliance with SP9 to the LPA. However, as has become abundantly clear, delivery of that link is not guaranteed. The Town Council has confirmed at this inquiry that it's unwilling to facilitate works on its land. No compulsory purchase indication has been given. No legal opinion confirming any duty on the Town Council has been placed before this inquiry. The appellant puts forward two mechanisms, Condition 34 and a UU, which we say confer no legal right to enter the land and construct the link. If the Town Council refuses access, neither mechanism here compels delivery. And there's no evidence before you that the LHA agrees with Mrs. Elsa's judgment that the Town Council's withdrawal does not frustrate the appeal site sustainability by non-car modes of transport. The appellants had over 5 years to resolve the Shrubbery Grove Grove design and the third-party land issue. It's not happened, and it poses a real problem for the appellant's proposals and policy compliance. Let's move on to the routes, starting with walking. And there are two principal walking routes from the site to the town centre and two subsidiary routes. We say neither provides a suitable, sustainable connection, nor complies with DFT's inclusive mobility guidance. Starting first with Barkway Road. This route runs from the northeast corner of the site along Barkway Road to the A10 gyratory. The Alliance commissioned a specialist mapping company to survey this route. And that survey demonstrates a level change of 43.7 meters over a distance of 774.6 meters, giving an average gradient of 5.6%. One section has an average gradient of 10% over a distance of 140 meters. The route requires pedestrians to cross Barkway Road twice. The second route, the A10 route. Now, this route runs from the western parcel through the Greenwall Plantation, using footpath 9 to Shrubbery Grove, then onto the A10 London Road along the post-segregated footway cycleway on the A10, and then onto the A10 gyratory. At present, the section of footpath 9 is unlit, uneven, and unmade. The Shrubbery Grove link involves a level change of approximately 8 meters over a distance of 89 meters, giving an average gradient of 8.9%, with multiple short sections exceeding 10%. The current design includes elongated steps and a chicane barrier. This is neither an inclusive nor an attractive route. As to inclusivity, the gradient along Barkway Road substantially exceeds the DFT inclusive mobility guidance, which provides that gradient should not exceed 1 in 20, 5%, and that even below that threshold, level rest sections must be provided at regular intervals. It should be noted that the County Council's own guidance describes this guidance as comprising, that being the inclusive mobility guidance, comprising part of the design standards used to support walking. It's our submission that neither route from the site to the town centre complies with that guidance, and there are no level rest sections on the Barkway Road route. Then moving on to two more routes, the Bridleway Royston 10 and footpath Royston 9. These two further routes exist. Both of these routes are indirect, they're unlit and on unmade surfaces. They're largely leisure routes and will be particularly unattractive in poor weather and in the dark. You've got the Grange Bottom Boardwalk, which is proposed at only 2 meter width, which is below the desirable minimum width of 3 meters set out in the DFT Cycle Infrastructure Design Guidance, LTN 120, for shared use paths. Its long-term maintenance has not been secured. The gradient of the boardwalk would be 24%, almost 5 times steeper than the recommended maximum gradient set out in inclusive mobility. As to distances, almost all key amenities lie beyond the 800-meter walk distance from the centre of either parcel. The train station would be in excess of a 2-kilometer walk distance from the centre of the eastern parcel. These distances substantially exceed the CIHT recommended maximum of 800 meters to a town centre. Ma'am, you also heard directly from residents about the practical difficulty of these routes, including walking uphill with shopping and the inability to use stepped sections with prams. That real-world evidence supports the documentary and the technical material. Moving on to cycling. Again here, gradients are central. Mr. Frisby's formulation that the relevant question is whether the gradient renders sustainable travel unfeasible sets the bar unrealistically high. The correct question is not whether sustainable travel is physically impossible, but whether it's so unattractive to a significant proportion of likely users that in reality, residents will drive. In assessing the proposed cycle routes, the Alliance relies on LTN 120, which provides that routes failing its key design parameters are unlikely to be accessible, safe, or attractive for all users. Now, there was much debate in this inquiry around the applicability of LTN 120 to the cycling routes relied on by the appellant. We submit this guidance applies not merely to new infrastructure, but is also relevant to the consideration of proposed routes on a new development. Again, taking the relevant routes in turn, Barkway Road. Now, LTN 120 recognizes that human physiology means people can cycle steep gradients that are fairly short, but are not capable of maintaining high levels of effort for longer distances. Table 5.8 provides that the desirable maximum cycling distance at a gradient of 5% should be 30 meters. As already noted, the average gradient along Barkway Road is in excess of this guidance and is sustained for a distance of 776 meters. That's 26 times longer than the 30 meters recommended maximum distance noted within that guidance. This is in addition to the section where that gradient actually goes up to 10%. Mr. Hyder's conclusion is that this route would not be used by the vast majority of residents for cycling purposes. Cars parked on both sides of Barkway Road compound the gradient challenge, and that's consistent with what residents told the inquiry. Route 2, the A10 London Road via Shrubbery Grove. The appellant acknowledges that it cannot deliver a new LTN 120 compliant cycle route from the site to Shrubbery Grove. As we know, the proposed design for this cycle link is contrary to several core LTN 120 design principles. I've set them out there, 1, 14, 16, and 19. The first is that the cycling infrastructure should be accessible to everyone. The second is that surfaces must be hard, smooth, level, durable, permeable, and safe in all weathers, and that loose gravel should be avoided. The third is that access control measures, such as chicane barriers and dismount signs, should not be used. And the fourth is that schemes must be easy and comfortable to ride. The proposed design, described by the County Council as having shortcomings, includes chicane barriers, elongated steps requiring cyclists to dismount, and a route through woodland on an unmade surface with gradients exceeding LTN 120 threshold. Mr. Hayder's evidence is thus that it would not be suitable for the majority of cyclists. There are also legal barriers. The route utilizes public right-of-way 9, which is currently a public footpath where cycling is prohibited. And to allow cycling would require a legal process to amend the status of the footpath. Grange Bottom. For completeness, the appellant's experts appear to suggest that Grange Bottom is a legitimate cycling option. It's not. The gradient is far beyond the maximum contemplated by LTN 120. The boardwalk is curved and only 2 meters wide, and the County Council itself referred to the absence of a cyclable link to Grange Bottom. Ma'am, we're inviting you to find that this does not provide a genuine choice for cyclists from this scheme. Overall, our submission is that only the most proficient cyclists will be able to cycle the 2 main cycle routes from this site to the town centre. The same is true for Grange Bottom. And we heard residents describe cycling up the hill on a folding electric bike at first gear and full power, arriving out of breath. If an electric bicycle at maximum assistance struggles, an unassisted cyclist faces an impossible climb. Public transport. The senior transport policy officer confirmed at committee that it would be challenging to establish a sustainable transport connection through buses. Therefore, the focus has been on active travel modes. The consequences of that conclusion are significant. If active travel modes are themselves deficient, as we contend, the sustainable transport case for this site collapses. While the appeal site is accessible by a bus service, there are no bus stops near the site on the A10 London Road. As to the service along Barkway Road, it offers only 7 services per day into Royston. Early mornings and late evenings are not covered in both directions. There's only 1 bus per 2 hours on average on weekdays in each direction. There's no Sunday service. This provision is not appropriate for the majority of commuters, even with the difference in working patterns following the pandemic, as relied on by Mr. Frisbee. The appellant also places reliance on the enhancement of local bus services and proposals to invest in the bus service to improve its frequency. When one considers the evidence, the allocation of the Strand 2 contribution in this regard was described in the officer report as, where possible, Barkway Road bus service improvements. Matters have not moved much further since. There's no clear evidence before this inquiry of what bus frequency improvements will actually be delivered. Turning to the Briery Lane decision. Madam, we also rely on two decisions which reinforce our case on sustainable location. First, the council has recently refused permission for a site at land opposite Heath Farm, Briery Lane, what was yesterday described as the Gladman site. This was a tilted balance case, which involved the proposal for up to 84 dwellings on elevated land on the southern edge of Royston, accessed via Echo Hill. The officer concluded that, by reason of the site's location, topography, and distance from the closest bus station, the proposal represented unsustainable development that would not give all users a genuine choice of transport modes, in conflict with policies SP6 and T1 of the local plan and Section 9 of the MPPF. Significant weight was attributed against the proposal in the planning balance on this ground. Mrs. Else accepted in cross-examination that the site shares at least two directly comparable characteristics with the appeal site, an edge of settlement location in Royston and pronounced topography. We submit that it shares two more, reliance on steep and indirect routes to the town centre and similar distance from bus stops, particularly from the western parcel. This decision further supports the case for refusal here on sustainability grounds. The second decision we rely on is the High Court decision in Barkway Homes and the Secretary of State decision of this year. In that case, the court upheld an inspector's decision to dismiss an appeal on the basis that the site did not represent a sustainable location and the proposed development could not be regarded as well related to the settlement of Great Lumley. The inspector had found that walking distances from the midpoint dwelling to most key facilities were outside or well outside the 800-meter threshold, which we've already discussed, that bus services were of limited frequency, and that walking and public transport would not provide for a genuine choice of transport modes so as to realistically reduce dependency on the private car. While with matters of planning judgment, each case must turn on its merits, we submit that the parallels with the present case are striking. What that case highlights is that in determining whether a site is sustainable, it's relevant to consider A, the walking distance to key services in the settlement and the impact that would have on whether residents would walk to them rather than use a private car. B, the frequency of local bus services, even if the distances to the bus stops were not unacceptable. C, overall, whether there will be an actual opportunity to substitute walking or public transport in place of the car. And D, whether walking and public transport will provide for a genuine choice of transport modes so as to realistically reduce dependency on the private car. In our submission, taking those factors together in this case, Mr. Hegarty's conclusion is correct. The resulting mode share for access to the site will be almost exclusively dominated by the private car. A final point on accessibility. Now, MPPF paragraph 115B and 117B impose specific requirements that access be safe and suitable for all users, and that the needs of people with disabilities and reduced mobility be addressed in relation to all modes of transport. None of the proposed walking or cycling routes is suitable for persons with a disability or mobility impairments. They also restrict opportunities for older people and young children. Mr. Frisbee's response in cross-examination was telling. If you have a disability and can walk, you can walk. If you have a disability and can cycle, you can cycle. We say that misses the point. The question is whether the routes provide safe, suitable, and attractive access for all users, including for the disabled or mobility impaired, as the MPPF requires. They do not. Overall, this development would create a car-based community that conflicts with MPPF paragraphs 115 and 117. Policy SP6 requires development in locations that enable sustainable journeys to key services and facilities and provides a range of sustainable transport options available to all potential occupants or users. Policy T1 requires the scheme to be served by public transport and by safe, direct, and convenient routes for pedestrians and cyclists. Now, Policy SP9, in particular C2, requires more than the bare availability of alternatives to the car. It requires walking, cycling, and public transport to be designed to be the most attractive forms of transport and to link effectively with surrounding areas. This scheme does not meet that standard. The second issue, the effect on the highway network, starting with policy. Now, paragraph 118 of the MPPF places on the developer a positive obligation to support significant development with a vision-led transport assessment and travel plan, so that the likely impacts can be assessed. Paragraph 116 provides that development should be refused on highways grounds where the impact would be severe. Policy T1 of the local plan provides that planning permission will not be granted
provides that planning permission will be granted only where development would lead to highway safety problems or cause unacceptable impacts upon the highway network. However, as the case of Satnam Millennium Limited and the Secretary of State confirms, if the transport assessment is too deficient for a judgment about severity to be withdrawn, paragraph 116 cannot come to the developer's aid. The onus is on the appellant to produce a sound evidential platform. Where material uncertainty persists, the decision maker is not obliged to take the risk. The council no longer wishes to contest conflict with MPPF paragraph 116, as referred to in its first reason for refusal. We maintain this conflict, and it remains a live issue before you, madam. It's not sufficient for the appellant to simply assert that the LHA and LPA have looked at it and are content. Mr. Hayder has identified a number of specific and serious deficiencies in the appellant's transport evidence that neither the LHA nor the LPA have adequately addressed. Taken cumulatively, these render the evidence base unfit for the purpose of enabling you, madam, to reach an informed judgment on highways impacts. First, site access. Now, Mr. Frisbee's proof records a northbound 85th percentile speed as 46.2 miles per hour and the southbound speed as 42.7 miles per hour. In his rebuttal, he states that the southbound 85th percentile speed was the higher of these two measurements at 46.2 miles per hour. As was accepted in cross-examination, these two statements are contradictory. Although Mr. Frisbee admitted the error, he remained unable to clarify the position. The speed survey data upon which the appellant relies on is drawn from a single ATC located at the southwestern edge of the site on Barkway Road. The mode site access plan shows visibility displays of 2.4 meters by 131.2 meters in both directions, it being unclear to us whether this is in reliance on the northbound or southbound speed. Mr. Hayder's evidence that the recorded speed of one ATC cannot safely be relied upon to determine the required visibility display in both directions. This approach means the appellant has failed to measure the required speeds from a suitable location in respect of at least one direction. In the absence of a measured speed from the correct location, standard practice requires use of the posted speed limit as the minimum design speed. On a 60 mile per hour road, that produces a required visibility display of 215 meters. No plan demonstrating that a 250 meter display can be achieved has been placed before this inquiry. The Alliance invites you to find that necessary sightlines have not been demonstrated and in any event are not achievable. The significance of this point is not merely technical. If the visibility display cannot be achieved, the site access will not comply with the required design standard for a road of this speed, and the result would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, the first limb of the MPPF paragraph 116 test. Absence of a base model. We turn to the modeling of the A10 gyratory. The existing gyratory comprises 3 giveaway junctions and a zebra crossing. Now, Mode chose to model that layout using TRL's junction software. A proper base model should be validated against observed conditions, including Q data, to show that it replicates what is happening on the ground. TRL, the creators of the software, has itself confirmed that this gyratory will be tricky to model in junctions. Despite that, no validation exercise has been undertaken. When the development scenario is introduced, the zebra crossing is replaced by a puffing crossing, but the 3 giveaway junctions remain. Mode then switched to Linsig for the proposed scenario. Mr. Hayder's evidence is that in a sound assessment, validated parameters from the base model would then be carried forward into the future year modeling. That has not been done. Although Mr. Frisbee asserted in cross-examination that Linsig was used for a 2024 base model, no evidence of that has been produced. All disclosed Linsig models already assume the post-puffing crossing and therefore do not model the existing baseline with the zebra crossing. The result is an unvalidated modeling exercise using default parameters on a layout that TRL itself describes as tricky. And as Mr. Hayder explains, the Linsig results consistently predict queue lengths materially lower than those visible in the December 2024 camera footage. The modeling cannot therefore be treated as a reliable platform for assessing highway impact. Linsig validation and queue evidence. Now, the Linsig model relies on slope and intercept parameters taken from the unvalidated 2020 junctions model. There's been no validation report produced. The traffic counts used for the 2024 modeling were collected on a single day in December 2024, a non-neutral month under DFT tag guidance, and no checks have been made to ensure those counts are representative. Only 12 snapshot images have been disclosed. No independent queue surveys have been conducted. Mr. Frisbee cited a TRL article in his evidence suggesting that collecting Q data was a waste of time. That article is plainly not formal guidance. Its casual and flippant tone makes that self-evident. Traffic modeling guidance clearly states that Q data can be useful for traffic model calibration. The LINSIG results consistently show Qs lower than those visible in the camera footage. The LINSIG model predicts a mean maximum Q of 0.8 vehicles at Barkway Road, compared with an average of just under 4 vehicles observed in the December 2024 snapshots. This is before adding traffic growth for 2027, committed development, and the additional 197 vehicle trips generated in the AM peak. Mr. Hayder's evidence is that the base LINSIG model has not been validated and is underestimating current traffic conditions. Microsimulation. We turn next to the failure to model Barkway Road, the sole vehicular access corridor to this 280 dwelling development. Mr. Hayder has identified existing delay on Barkway Road and has video evidence of queuing and vehicles mounting the footway as a consequence of current traffic conditions and parking arrangements. Mr. Hayder explains that LINSIG cannot model Barkway Road because parked vehicles create one-way working and dynamic driver interaction. Now, TfL's traffic modeling guidelines confirm that microsimulation is capable of reproducing queuing, blocking back, and parking impacts. Mr. Hayder expressed the same view in his proof of evidence. So the situation is as follows. We've got 98% of development traffic will be traveling from the site across the gyratory and passing the parked bays. The LINSIG modeling method chosen is unable to model that impact. The appellant, the Local Highways Authority, and LPA have always been aware of another modeling method that could perform this exercise. There's already delay and unsafe driving behavior on Barkway Road, and despite this, no microsimulation model has been produced. We submit that the exclusion entirely of the Barkway Road access from the traffic modeling is a serious deficiency. The only justification advanced is that HCC did not require it. That's not enough. The inspector must assess whether the evidential platform is adequate, particularly where the development traffic will add to existing and committed flows on the site's only vehicular access corridor. Finally, the A10 Puffin crossing. We recognize that the appellant has submitted only a preliminary design, but Mr. Hayder's evidence that there should nevertheless be sufficient comfort that a suitable design can be achieved and would be acceptable in design and safety terms. No stage 1 road safety audit had been carried out. Mr. Frisbee's assertion that stage 1 RSA is only required at the section 278 stage is inconsistent with HCC guidance and DMRB guidance. The crossing has not been shown to be deliverable, and no modeling scenario has been run without it, despite the fact that the entire traffic model assumes its implementation. So the legal position is as follows. In Satnam, Mr. Justice Dove held that the effect of paragraph 111 of the MPPF, now 118, was to require a developer to produce a transport assessment which is sufficiently satisfactory for a conclusion about the severity of the impact to be reached. If that is done, and the impact is less than severe, there is no highway impact basis for refusing permission. But if the transport assessment is too deficient for such a judgment to be reached, paragraph 109, now 116, cannot assist the developer. Otherwise, it will be open under the framework for a developer to come forward with no sound work and require the council to prove the serious impact. That is not how the two paragraphs are meant to work. Mr. Justice Dove further held, where the evidence from the developer was not reliable, a precautionary approach was required. The highways evidence had to be very clear, soundly based, and should not leave a substantial risk that adverse impacts would occur. If there were such a doubt, and this is a quote, if there were such a doubt, the risk should not be taken that severe impacts would arise to be visited on the highway system, its users, and those living nearby the highways, which would be adversely affected, or the Highways Authority to resolve, but not at the developer's expense. It was for the developer to do the work properly. The parallels of the present case are plain. We have no validated base model. The LINSIG exercise relies on unvalidated parameters and limited Q evidence. Barkway Road, the site's sole vehicular access, has not been modelled. No stage 1 RSA has been produced for the Puffin crossing, and the speed survey data is contradictory and incomplete. Taken together, their cumulative effect is to leave material uncertainty that cannot be resolved on the evidence before this inquiry. The decision maker is not required to give the appellant the benefit of the doubt where the evidential platform is inadequate. Where material uncertainty exists as to whether severe impacts will arise, the appropriate response under paragraph 116 is refusal not assumption. Finally, the planning balance. Now, Mrs. Else purports to weigh the planning balance, but her assessment identifies no transport-related harm. It proceeds on the basis of full compliance with paragraphs 110, 115, and 116 of the MPPF and policy SP9. As was put to Mrs. Else in cross-examination, if that premise is wrong, and if there is conflict, her balance cannot stand. The council's own officer, when assessing the highway's impact, recognised that the proposal would result in harm and attributed moderate weight to that harm in the planning balance. That assessment was based on on the basis that the officer accepted the highway authority's withdrawal of objection at face value. We have demonstrated that there are good reasons not to do so. The Alliance accepts that the benefits of the development, up to 280 dwellings, including 40% affordable housing, and other benefits are material and carry weight. However, it's submitted that the harms are also substantial. The inspector must also consider the failure to provide a sustainable location for new housing in conflict with MPPF paragraphs 115 and 117, and local plan policies SP6, SP1, SP9, and T1. The deficiencies in the transport evidence base which prevent the inspector from being satisfied that severe impacts will not arise, and the creation of a car-dominated community on the edge of Royston. We adopt and reinforce the conclusion of the LPA, relying on the evidence of Mr. Connell, that even where the tilted balance is engaged, the adverse impacts of the scheme would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Accordingly, Madam, we respectfully submit the appeal should be dismissed.
Thank you. Mr. Chung, you ready?
Yes.
For yours? Yeah.
Respond on condition 34 now that I've received
Yes.
the wording from both the residents and from the council. Starting first of all with the amendment suggested by the Residents Alliance and the reason which they set out there. Well, the first point, if you look at what appears in the reason, is that the Alliance are in fact seeking through this condition to run their substantive case. That is not the purpose of a conditions session. The purpose of the conditions session, Madam, is to ask ourselves what conditions you want to impose, assuming that you agree with the appellant that planning permission should be granted. So the wording that's put forward here, if you look at the reason, is clearly designed to frustrate the grant of planning permission, because as we keep repeating, and we'll come back to it in closing, and my learned friend for the council, Ms. Pindham, is right, there can be no guarantee that the works of improvement within Shrubbery Grove will be delivered. We have no control over that. So it's wrong as a matter of principle at the condition session to, in effect, advance your substantive case. Shouldn't be doing that. That's not the purpose of the condition. In any event, the drafting my learned friend puts forward doesn't actually achieve what he thinks he achieves. Because the whole point of the condition being drafted in the way that I drafted it, which he hasn't changed, is that the works will only be delivered pursuant to this condition if a strategy and timescale for the delivery of the improvement works is agreed. Under capital B, small b is of no utility if a strategy and timescale isn't agreed. So he's wrong in principle, and his drafting is wrong as well. So I invite you to put those suggestions to one side. Turning next to what the council say, I've been through this. I hope I'm reading it correctly. There's some comments in the text, etc. But as I understand it, my own friend Ms. Pindham would put me right if I got this wrong. The only thing that's been suggested is that our suggestion, of course, is that the words in the square brackets don't need to be there at all, which should be where practicable step 3 include a lighting plan. So we say you don't need any of those words because the scheme is going to be submitted and the council will only approve what it likes. But it seems to me the only suggestion from the council here is that the where practicable step-free and should be excluded, but the lighting plan should be included within the condition. I think that's all that's been said by the LPA. We have no objection to that. And then there's a minor change. Design should be informed updated habitat species and tree serves by qualified persons. We have no objection to that. And I'm not quite sure what's been said under B, that the words in highlighted in blue or purple, where I wrote strategy and timescale for the delivery improvement works shall be agreed in writing by the LPA, but I don't know whether it's been suggested that should be taken out. So I'm unclear, but if all that's been said is that the words in writing by the LPA should be removed, then once again, we have no objection to that.
It's rather the opposite, but I'm grateful for all of that. So in writing by the LPA has been included by the LPA. So yeah.
That's how I read it as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Before I turn to my closing submissions, it's probably easier if I pick up the few points I have in response to what we've heard first, and then I can proceed to read out my our closing submissions. So in the order in which they were delivered, I'll begin with the council's closing submissions. Paragraph 7, Ma'am, it's a good place to start, and my learned friend Spindham's closing submissions. She says, first, because the appellant's case relies upon a footway cycleway connection to Shrubbery Grove when there's no agreement or commitment securing that land and no assured delivery mechanism. Now, we must be precise here, Ma'am, because this misunderstanding, we've sought to put it right many times throughout the inquiry, and I'm sure the council fully understand what our case is and what the evidence shows. We do not, first of all, rely upon the connection through Shrubbery Grove. That's been made clear in the evidence and in the evidence trail as well. I took the council's witnesses and the association's witnesses through the evidence trail in the TA, where we made it quite clear from the off that this is not what we rely upon. The second matter we need to be clear about is if you decide that a connection through there is important, our case is that there is already a connection there. It exists. That's the second point. What there is no agreement or commitment to is the works of improvement. So there are three things going on there, and we mustn't elide all of them together because that is very confusing. Then the next part that I need to respond to is my learned friend's analysis of the PowerGen case and the other cases that she cites there. You'll see in our closing submissions, madam, that we do not rely upon those cases at all in respect of this dispute about the works through the Green Walk plantation. The only reference that we made to PowerGen was in Mrs. Elsie's proof, paragraph 7.119, and that was in the context of the statutory functions of the conservators, not in connection with this issue. But since it's been brought up and never one able to resist a bit of legal analysis, I would make the point that what the PowerGen case and that line of authorities sets out is that public bodies, and the town council is a public body, must act reasonably. Now, my learned friend says they are not authority for the proposition that a planning permission overrides private law rights. No, I agree they're not authority for such a bold and far-stretching proposition. But what they do demonstrate, as I say, is the central point that public bodies must act reasonably. The town council is a public body, and the question that will arise is, what are the purposes for which it holds the land? What are the purposes for which it holds the land? As a public body, it must hold the land for public purposes, to act in the best interests of the residents of Royston. And if there is a planning decision issued by you, having heard all of the evidence, that the works of improvement through that Greenwalk plantation are a good thing, and we know already that the local highway authority think that they're a good thing, and the sustainability officer thinks that they're a good thing, the question then will arise whether the town council are acting reasonably in frustrating those works. So that's how the issue arises. But we don't ask you to, that dispute and that legal analysis is not before you, and neither, with the greatest respect, madam, can you resolve that. That's why we accept that there's no certainty that those works of improvement will come about. That's why Condition 34 has been drafted in the way that it has. That's why the UU has been drafted in the way that it has. We will address this matter in greater detail in our closings. We say the important thing is what is likely to happen on a balance of probabilities, and then we address the situation of, well, what if that doesn't happen? What's the fallback, and is it harmful? Then there's a lot of time spent by my learned friend, indeed both my learned friends, looking at the proposed works of improvement, and measuring that against the standard set out in LTN 120. And paragraphs are devoted here by my learned friend Miss Minden to how it comes up short as against that standard. Well, the interesting thing is, madam, the appellant, through Mr. Frisby, has never asserted that it would be compliant with LTN 120. It's always been accepted that it would not be compliant with LTN 120. But if it was as bad as my learned friends now make out, why would the local highway authority accept it? Why would they have called for it? Why would they have said that they were content with this design? And importantly, the sustainability officer of the local planning authority didn't say that he wanted it step-free because that would make it compliant with LTN 120. It's agreed between Mr. Frisby and both of those officers that with steps or without steps, it's never going to be LTN 120. The key point to take away from this is that both those officers would like to see these works of improvement. They think it would be a good thing, if possible. So this idea that it's so terrible that we shouldn't even contemplate it is not borne out by the evidence. Then there's the suggestion at paragraph 31 of my learned friend's submissions that the condition 34, which we just looked at, is somehow unacceptable, because the impression sought to be given here is that despite all this time working on a design, nothing has been agreed, and leaving it to a condition is not helpful, because if nothing's been agreed up until now, why would it be agreed pursuant to the condition? But once again, that is not an accurate representation of the evidence. The evidence shows that the design that was put forward by Mr. Frisby was accepted by the local highway authority. They liked the design. They wanted it. Late in the day, the sustainability officer of the local planning authority said that his preference would be for something that was step-free. So that's the only question left up for debate as pursuant to the condition. Are we going to have something which is step free, which would lead to greater tree loss? Or are we going to stick to the plan that the local highway authority wanted? So this impression that sought to be given, that nothing was agreed, is the wrong impression. And then finally, Madam, it's a matter for you, Madam, but paragraph 44 of my learned friend's submissions, she makes reference to Mrs. Elsie's decision to depart from the statement of common ground when she wrote her evidence. Now, this is a procedural matter. If someone departs from a statement of common ground and it causes difficulties for the other party, leads to wasted costs, etc., they can make a cost application. But that's not what's sought to be done here for good reason, because the proof of evidence of Mrs. Els was given to the council and Mr. Connell to read 4 weeks before the inquiry. They've had ample time to read her evidence where she sets out why she attaches the weights that she does to the various benefits. And the council had the opportunity and took the opportunity to cross-examine Mrs. Els about it. So in deciding, and what weight you attach will be a matter for you, in deciding what weight you attach to her judgment about those weights, we invite you to listen to her evidence, both written and oral, and her answers in cross-examination, and decide whether you agree with her or whether you don't. The fact that she's saying something different from what was in the statement of common ground is not relevant to that issue. What matters is the evidence which is given and the evidence that's been tested. So that's all I wanted to say about my learned friend Ms. Pindham's closing submissions. Turning to my learned friend Mr. Samakula, I just wanted to pick up a few points. Now, I'll begin at paragraph 10, if I may. Now, it's very, very important that no one at this inquiry misrepresents the evidence. Indeed, those who misrepresent the evidence, all they do is to undermine their own credibility. So if we look at paragraph 10, I understand the first sentence, and that's the Alliance's position, and of course they're entitled to it. But then they say, this is consistent with Mrs. Elsie's oral evidence, in which she said that the Acid Movement Plan set out in the master plan, which included the link, was a key part of how the appellant demonstrated compliance with SP9 to the LPA. Well, I don't think anything could be more clear from our evidence, as I've already said, that it's our position, and has been our position, throughout this case, as set out in the TA and the evidence, the cross-examination, and everything, that we do not rely upon the link through Shrubbery Grove. The link is already there, but we made it very clear that even if it wasn't there, we rely upon the Barkway corridor as being sufficient. We simply draw your attention to the fact that it is a link within Shrubbery Grove. It already exists and is already being used and can continue to be used. Yeah. So to tie together paragraph 10, what my learned friend says there, and what appears at the beginning of paragraph 11, is clearly misleading, because he gives the impression that the appellant has said, we rely upon this link, and yet we can't guarantee its delivery. And that's simply plain wrong. And then the matters become even worse. At the bottom of paragraph 11, my learned friend says, there is no evidence before the inspector that the local highway authority agrees with Mrs. Elsie's judgment that the town council's withdrawal does not frustrate the appeals site sustainability by non-car modes. Once again, that is plain wrong. We know what the position is at this inquiry. The position is, as Mr. Frisby explained in his cross-examination, and I don't remember him being challenged about it, was that it became clear to the highway authority and the planning officers that the works of improvement through Shrubbery Grove could not be guaranteed to be delivered because the town council had withdrawn its consent. And despite that, and post-dating that, the officers recommended approval, and the local highway authority signed a statement of common ground with the appellant, not objecting to this proposal and setting out what measures it wanted to see delivered. And subject to those, it has no objection and has not appeared at this inquiry or in any way indicated that it objects. So it's quite wrong to say, oh, well, there's no evidence that the local highway authority agrees with Mrs. Elsie's judgment, that it doesn't frustrate the appeal side claim. And that's the very basis upon which the entire appeal is being heard. We then see a paragraph 24. There was much debate in the inquiry about the applicability of LTN 120 to the cycling routes relied by the appellant. The residents submit this guideline applies not merely to new infrastructure, but is also relevant to the consideration of proposed routes as part of a new development. Now, I'm not as clever as my learned friend, Mr. Semakula, so I have to write all my questions out. And my second question to Mr. Hayder, when you look at your notes, Ma'am, was this. Third question, rather. Cycle accessibility, your paragraph 5.1, LTN 120, not a guide for judging the acceptability or otherwise of existing cycle routes, is it? No. Madam, I see that the residents continue to rely on Priory Lane, Royston, and the Barkway Homes case. I'm genuinely surprised, given the answers that we heard in cross-examination. And you'll note that in our closing submissions, we do not trouble you any further with those decisions. I'll come back to the case that my learned friend relies on. I must confess, as I said to my team, that Mr. Semakula should be given absolute top marks for finding a case in which expressly says that Satnam is wrong. The paragraphs he cites repeat again and again with the authority of a High Court judge that Satnam is wrong, which I think is pretty impressive. But leaving that to one side, as we'll show, if we go to the top of his page 12, he says in the second sentence, where material uncertainty persists, the decision maker is not obliged to take the risk. We'll see that material uncertainty is not the phraseology used by the judge. He uses a different phraseology, and the difference is important, and we'll go to that in a moment. Paragraph 42, he makes reference to the error that he picked up on Mr. Frisby's evidence, and he said, although Mr. Frisby admitted the error, he remained unable to clarify the position. And you'll recall we gave you the reference from the raw data where the information could be found. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And with that, I'll turn to our closing submissions. If I could just ask for those to be handed out. Do I have a copy? Yeah, I don't have a copy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Madam, I'll begin, and because they're members of the public here, I'll read it out in full, even though there may be some repetition with what you've already heard. Set out in our opening statement, there are 4 issues to be considered in this appeal. These are: issue 1, whether the proposal would provide adequate opportunity for travel by residents and visitors by non-car transport modes. Issue 2, the effect of the proposal on the local highway network and highway safety. Issue 3, the effect of the proposal on the Thurfield Heath site of special scientific interest. And issue 4, whether any material considerations, including the provision of housing, warrant a decision other than in accordance with the development plan. Before delving into each of these issues, we outline the planning context within which this appeal takes place. The local plan was adopted in 2022 and sought to deliver around 14,000 homes across the district, 15% of which was allocated to Royston. However, not a single one of those houses has been delivered to date in Royston. The local plan itself was riddled with shortcomings from day one due to the step approach taken in the local plan, delaying significant portions of housing delivery to the later years of the plan. Even the examining inspector highlighted this as an issue at the time of examination. At the time of refusal, the authority had a 3.9-year housing land supply and now claims to have a 2.6-year supply. We say that the figure is even lower at 2.1 years. Whichever figure one picks, it is clear that the housing land supply position for the LPA is crippling. The lack of any allocated housing delivery in Royston has resulted in no affordable housing being offered in the town either. By all measures, the local plan is failing, and that failure is accelerating. The district needs housing now, the local plan is failing to deliver, and a plan-led solution is a speck in the far horizon. The authority agrees that Royston itself is a sustainable location. It's described as one of the main towns in the district and was supposed to deliver almost 2,000 homes over the planned period. Therefore, the town clearly has a well-established array of services capable of sustaining housing growth, including Royston train station. To meet the growing housing needs of the district, and in particular Royston, it is inevitable that greenfield sites will have to be released over and beyond the allocated sites. Looking at the wider geography of Royston, as Mrs. Else explained, the west of Royston is constrained by Thurfield Heath, development to the north is restricted by the A10, and there's already development allocated to the east. Therefore, South Royston, including the site, remains a strong candidate for further development. In that context, the appellant worked for over 6 years to secure the agreement of the planning officers, the local highway authority, Natural England, and all other statutory consultees that this proposal was both sustainable and well designed in all respects. The officers were not shy in demonstrating their support for this proposal. As we set out in our opening statement, the highways officer, the senior transport policy officer, and the development and conservation manager all supported the proposal and warned the committee of refusing the application on highway grounds. That advice went unheeded, but it places the arguments now raised at this appeal in their proper context. Issue 1. Whether the proposal will provide adequate opportunity to travel by residents and visitors by non-car transport modes. Both local and national policies stipulate that reasonableness and practicality lie at the centre of any assessment of a site's sustainability and accessibility credentials. Policy SP6 of the local plan states that the authority would deliver accessibility improvements to promote the use of sustainable transport modes insofar as reasonable and practicable. In similar vein, paragraph 115 of the NPPF requires that sustainable transport modes are prioritised taking account of the vision for the site, the type of development, and its location. That realism and practicability is notably absent from the approach advocated by both the authority and the residents. Their complaint is about the gradient that lies between the town centre and the site. That is, however, the natural topography of Royston, and neither is there anything unique about the relationship of this site to the town centre as compared with the existing areas of Royston and some of the sites allocated in the local plan. It would be impractical and unreasonable to expect that somehow this development should change the gradient of Royston, as Mr. Hegarty agreed. That is why the question of whether the proposal is sustainable and accessible is more sensibly answered by having regard to what opportunities are available to make the site more sustainable and accessible, and whether those opportunities have been taken. We say that all reasonable opportunities to improve accessibility have been correctly identified and taken, and Mr. Hegarty agreed that this has indeed been done. The appellant has been able to achieve this by working together with the local highway authority. The highway authority's role in the planning system is critical. It has a statutory duty to ensure highway safety and capacity and to judge whether development proposals are sustainable in terms of accessibility. It is best placed to know the topography of the local area and, in this case, the challenges and opportunities present in Royston. Therefore, the strength of this proposal is best demonstrated by the fact that the Highway Authority has not only supported this proposal committee, but they've also supported this appeal by providing a statement of common ground with the appellant. The test is not whether the site provides opportunity to travel by foot, cycle or bus for every single person to each and every conceivable destination at any time of their choosing. That would be an impossibly high and unreasonable threshold against which to judge development proposals. Mr. Connell described the average person as a mother with a child in a buggy and shopping bags, accompanied by a toddler on a bike, who then refuses to ride the bike, as a result of which she may struggle to walk. However, that very thinking shows the unrealistic expectations placed on this proposal by the local planning authority. And that is why the test is whether, taking into account the type of development and its location, the proposal provides the opportunity for the vast majority of people who want to walk, cycle, or take the bus to do so. As against the correct test, the proposal performs admirably. There are three main access points proposed for this proposal, and these are Barkway Road, the walkway to Grange Bottom from the northeastern corner of the western parcel, and the link through the Shrubbery Grove, through to Shrubbery Grove from the northwestern corner of the western parcel, the Shrubbery Grove link. We consider below how the proposal provides sustainable travel options using these routes. Barkway Road. The appellant is offering numerous improvements to Barkway Road, which have been designed and developed in consultation with the Highway Authority. They're set out in full in Mr. Frisby's proof of evidence. How in brief, they include new bus stops on Barkway Road, upgrading several existing substandard crossings, extension of the 30-mile speed limit, and removal of the vehicle restraint system to further enhance suitability of Barkway Road for pedestrians, cyclists, and those that are mobility impaired. In addition, the appellant offers Strand 2 contribution totaling £1.56 million, which can be used by the Highway Authority to bring forward various improvements to the wider highway network, bus service enhancement, and sustainability linkages around Royston. Having regard to the improvements offered, Mr. Hegarty agreed that the appellant has done everything reasonable and practicable to improve sustainable travel on this route, and that the improvements offered will address the needs of those who are mobility impaired. In terms of choices available for non-car transport modes, three key alternatives will exist for future residents and their visitors: bus, walk, and cycle. Beginning with buses, the proposal offers a new bus stop within 400 metres of the eastern parcel and 750 metres of the western parcel, which equates to a 5 to 10 minute walk followed by a 5-minute bus into Royston. As Mr. Hegarty agreed, this is a reasonable and acceptable journey time for those wanting to access town centre services. That leaves a criticism as regards bus frequency. The Highway Authority, however, did not request the appellant to improve the frequency of bus services at Barkway Road. In fact, they explicitly asked for a contribution instead, to be able to have the option to decide whether they would like to increase bus services if this were needed in the future. The Highway Authority has satisfied, therefore, the existing frequency of bus service along Barkway Road, position endorsed by the local planning authority's planning officers. The Highway Authority and the planning officers are best placed to know and understand the particular demands of their local area and when and where bus services need improving. An appellant cannot be criticised for acting in accordance with the wishes of the local Highway Authority. In terms of walking, facilities at Royston Town Centre can be accessed within approximately 15 minutes from the site's pedestrian access. There is no guidance which suggests that such walk types are unreasonable in a market town of Royston's size. The Residents' Alliance point out that several facilities are over 800 metres from the appeal site, but as Mr. Frisby explained, the 800 metre distance is not an upper limit as set out by the CHIT Journeys by Foot, which sets out journeys of around 2 kilometres. It is a guidance figure, and there are several other factors which influence the choice of walking, such as the characteristics and features of the route and the level of services that can be accessed. Some people may not enjoy the gradient. They may prefer to cycle or bus or take a car. However, that does not mean walking is not a genuine choice for those who are minded to walk and have the ability to manage the gradient, which will be the vast majority of those who are otherwise minded to walk. This is evident from the fact that there are already residents living on similar gradients near the site, e.g. Shaftesbury Way, who can be seen walking. Further and crucially, the LPA have allocated parcel RY11 for housing, a site that sits next door to the proposal. The topography from the town centre to RY11 is the same to that which separates the proposal from the town centre and demonstrates the consistency in the decision-making of the planning committee. The fact that RY11 was allocated for a smaller number of houses cannot have any bearing on the accessibility credentials, since whether it's one house or 200, the policy on accessibility remains the same, as do the facts on the ground. Finally, in terms of cycling, the journey time from the appeal site to the town centre along Barkway Road would take approximately 9 minutes. Mr. Hegarty accepted there was nothing unusual or unsafe about using Barkway Road for cycling. In fact, he agreed that this was a slow-speed environment due to the parked cars on either side of the road. Both the authority and the residents sought to make much of the fact that cycling option along Barkway Road does not comply with LTN 120 and or the Department for Transport Inclusive Mobility guidance. Neither of these documents apply to existing routes of travel, as was accepted by Mr. Hegarty and Mr. Hayder. There is a logical explanation why that is the case, since to slavishly apply this guidance on existing routes would mean that many cycle routes up and down the country will fail the test and would be deemed unsustainable and inaccessible. As Mr. Frisbee explained, even the National Cycling Network will fail in parts to meet LTN 120 guidance, as this is the topography of the island we inhabit. Grange Bottom Walkway. First, it must be noted that the residents of the western parcel will have full access to Barkway Road through the site, and the location of this parcel within the site relative to Barkway Road will add only a few minutes to the journey. However, in line with this approach of identifying and taking all reasonable opportunities to improve sustainable accessibility, the appellant has identified and commits to delivering a walking connection through Grange Bottom to the town centre and beyond. Mr. Hegarty accepted that this will provide a genuine choice for walking into town. Mr. Frisbee explained that this route could also be used by cyclists if they wish to do so. The Grange Bottom Walkway will not meet the LTN 120 standard for cyclists, but the perfect should not be allowed to become the enemy of the good. It will provide a genuine cycling choice for those who are able and willing to dismount and walk their cycle for a few metres, something that common sense suggests is not beyond the capability of most cyclists. Before turning to the Shrubbery Grove link, it is worth noting at this stage that there are already two access points proposed which allow for non-car transport modes to be used. Barkway Road, which will have bus service options and the option to walk and cycle, and Grange Bottom, which users can use to walk or cycle into the town centre and beyond. Therefore, notwithstanding whether or not improvements to the Shrubbery Grove link are delivered, there exist two other separate access points which, with the improvement works proposed, ensure the site will provide adequate opportunities for non-car transport modes from day one. You recall, Madam, that Mr. Hegarty confirmed that his phasing concern related to the Shrubbery Grove link only, and on this point more widely we submit phasing is rightly a matter for the discretion of the local highway authority, which has expressed itself satisfied in this regard. So with that preface, important preface, we turn to the Shrubbery Grove link. Existing use and proposed improvements. As a matter of fact, public right-of-way 009 already exists and sits adjacent to the site. This right-of-way can be accessed directly from the appeal site, since a part of it sits within the ownership of the appellant's land, and we refer you to the land registry plan that's been submitted with the section 106 UU. As Mr. Frisbee explained, people already walk and cycle on this public right-of-way. Therefore, even if none of the improvement works offered by the appellant were ever to take place, the user of the appeal site will be able to use public right-of-way 009. Any suggestion that the Royston Town Council can single-handedly and of their own volition block the use of this right-of-way if any members of the public is wrong in law ignores the fact that part of it lies on land controlled by the appellant. As Mr. Frisbee stated, the local highway authority were aware of the possibility that the Shrubbery Grove link works may not come forward following the committee's refusal, and have still maintained no objection to this proposal. Mr. Connell confirmed that this is his understanding as well. Further, the Residents Association confirmed that they do not have any evidence to suggest that somehow the local highway authority are now objecting to this proposal if the improvement works are not brought forward. The Royston Town Council's objection. Much was made of the Town Council's current unwillingness to allow works to be carried out on their land. We describe this position as current since the Town Council, governed by elected councillors, had previously indicated that they would allow the works to be carried out, permission were granted. However, they have since resolved from that position. We submit that if permission is granted, it is very likely, and at the very least probable, which is the basis upon planning decisions are taken, madam, the balance of probabilities, that this position will shift yet again, and there are a number of points that are relevant to this particular matter. First, as a matter of law, the fact that a landowner objects to development being implemented on his land cannot ultimately lead to a reason for refusal. The decision maker is tasked with determining whether the grant of permission is desirable, having regard to the relevant test, section 38.6. The possibility the development may not proceed because of private law concerns is not without more a reason to refuse permission. In our case, there is no question that the wider development can be brought forward with or without the Shrubbery Grove link. The dispute simply relates to whether these improvements are likely to come forward. Further, the works of improvement of the link would clearly be in the public interest. That they are in the public interest is evidenced by the fact that the appellant agreed to carry out or fund the works at the request of the sustainability officer at the local planning authority. Enhancing this route will not only further improve the sustainability credentials of the site by allowing more users to use this route, but also it helps improve east-west connectivity, which is strongly encouraged by the SSI mitigation strategy to help reduce impacts on SSI. The route as proposed is sensitively designed and is likely to have negligible impact, as indicated by the local planning authority's ecologist, albeit this would be subject to detailed design and assessment at a reserved matter stage. Therefore, the delivery of improvement works to the Shrubbery Grove link is an all-round benefit. There is no planning reason for why these improvements should not be brought forward, and no evidence whatsoever has been submitted to demonstrate any planning harm that would arise from these works. We leave it to you, Inspector, to draw your own inferences as to why the Town Council has alighted on the argument that a well-designed and ecologically sensitive scheme would impact on ecology and or climate change. Given the numerous benefits that are set to arise from the delivery of the works and the lack of any planning harm, taken together with the Town Council's position that he wants to see greater accessibility, it is highly likely that were permission to be granted, the Town Council would not block the delivery of these works. Second, even if the Town Council maintained their current position following the grant of permission, it should be noted that the path already exists and is a highway maintained by the local highway authority. Therefore, the local highway authority possesses statutory powers to carry out various works on the public right-of-way, notwithstanding the ownership of the land by the Town Council. As for any works which may not be within the powers of the local highway authority, or which need to be carried out on land falling outside the boundary of the public right-of-way on the Town Council's land, it's within the gift of the local highway authority or the local planning authority to seek to compulsory purchase the land to deliver the improvement works proposed if they would like to see the works brought forward. The appellant offers a financial contribution to be provided to the local highway authority to allow them to deliver the works themselves if the appellant is not able to do so. Third, the Town Council are, after all, a public body whose actions are legally challengeable on public grounds, including acting unreasonably. If the proposal were to be granted permission and they thought to thwart the delivery of the improvement works without proper reason, then this is an action which could be the subject of legal challenge, not least by the local highway authority, which is in support of the works of improvement. Even the local planning authority would have to consider using the JR route to deliver these works because, if permission is granted, its development plan policy is committed to improve accessibility wherever possible. Therefore, we say that in all likelihood, the improvement works to the Shrubbery Grove link will be delivered if permission were to be granted. Just pausing there, Mum, you'll recall that I said to Mr. Connell, would they really sit on the sidelines once permission has been granted and cut off their nose to spite their face? On the one hand, they say they're there to act in the best interest of the residents, how important accessibility is. The development goes ahead and they sit there and say, no, all of these people living in the new state, we don't care that we could actually improve accessibility for them, but we're not going to. I think that's highly unlikely. However, in the event that the Shrubbery Grove link improvements are not delivered, the users of the proposal will still be able to connect directly on to this public right-of-way through the appeal site and use it in its current, and we say, perfectly usable state, something you'll have seen on site yourself. They will also have access to the proposed links to Grange Bottom, Barkway Road, with which there are no deliverability issues. The next issue is the design of the Shrubbery Grove link. As I've already alluded to, agreed it is not compliant with LTN 120, but the role that this guidance plays in decision making must not be overstated. First of all, like all guidance, LTN 120 provides only guiding principles that should be applied as appropriate in a reasonable and practicable manner. The same applies to the Department of Transport Inclusive Mobility Guidance. As Mr. Hayde agreed, such guidance does not provide a pass-fail test either for the acceptability of a cycle link or for the wider question of whether a proposed development site is sufficiently sustainable. Relaxations from standard can be granted, are routinely granted, and the local highway authority's discretion in this case was willing to accept such a relaxation from standard. Third, as Mr. Frisby pointed out, cyclists can be seen using the public right-of-way 009 already. The proposed improvements can only make its usability easier, not more difficult. Once again, we see an example of objectors relying on the fact that we cannot deliver the perfect to block the delivery of the good. Fourth, Mr. Frisby explained that improvement works in this link could be carried out such that a strep-free access could be designed and provided. This would, of course, be carried out in consultation with the local highway authority and with their approval as per condition 34. At the relevant time, all interested parties would have to decide what trade-off they want between accessibility on the one hand and the desire to minimise the extent of construction work on the other. So the interim conclusion on this, policy SP6 of the local plan is specifically targeted at sustainable transport and accessibility. Mr. Hegarty accepted that this policy is compliant with the NPPF policies, and the policy SP9, which is a much broader design policy, should be read having regard to SP6. We have explained why the proposal does provide adequate opportunity for non-car transport modes, and for the same reasons we say that the proposal complies with policy SP6. Mr. Hegarty accepted the policy SP9 does not seek anything more exacting than policy SP6 in terms of sustainability and accessibility, and thus compliance with policy SP9 is also achieved. It is, we say, Madam, telling that the local planning authority have not sought to argue that the proposal does not comply with policy SP6. In fact, Mr. Hegarty accepted that the proposal will comply with several of the criteria set out in SP6, and the LPA do not allege any breach with this policy as understood from his absence in the reasons for refusal. This is plainly because the proposal does comply with the sustainability and accessibility requirements set by the local plan policy, having regard to what is reasonable and practicable. And that is no doubt partly the reason why the local highway authority and the local planning authority officers supported this proposal and found no highways reason to object. We turn then to issue 2, the effect of the proposal on local highway network and highway safety, and understanding paragraph 116 of the NPPF. This paragraph requires that planning permission should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if it is demonstrated that the proposal would have an unacceptable highway safety or other severe impact on the road network, and the emphasis is ours. As the court concluded in the case of Satna Millennium, what this paragraph requires is for a developer to produce a transport assessment which is sufficiently satisfactory for a conclusion about the severity of the impact to be reached. If that is done, and the impact is less than unacceptable or severe, there is no highway basis in the framework for refusing permission in a tilted balance case. The appellant, the local highway authority, and now the local planning authority are agreed that there are no such impacts which warrant a reason for refusal under paragraph 116 of the NPPF. And that is because there's no evidence to demonstrate that the high test set out in paragraph 116 is met. The highway authority, an independent body tasked with maintaining highways and ensuring that appropriate design standards are adopted and delivered. There is no dispute that over the course of 6 years, the appellant worked closely with the local highway authority, ensuring that surveys and modelling were done to their satisfaction. As a result of this collaboration, the appellant has submitted a transport assessment with sufficient information to allow for the assessment of the severity of the impact. The highway authority and the planning authority agree that this is the case. This is notably different from the circumstance in the case of Satna Millennium, where the inspector had found that the local planning authority in Highways England, as they were then called, had raised understandable concerns relating to highway safety and efficiency. The appellant in this case places considerable reliance on the support of the local highway authority as the transport work was carried out in consultation with them over a significant period of time. Therefore, any complaints that different assessments should have been carried out can only go so far, since they were done as requested by the local highway authority and were supported and confirmed by Mr. Frisby's own professional opinion that the approach of the highway authority was indeed appropriate. Accordingly, we submit the appellant has no case to answer under paragraph 116 of the MPPF. Further, the local planning authority, having in particular cited paragraph 116 in their reason for refusal, were of the view that they disagreed with the conclusion reached, then they if the LPA were of the view that they disagreed with the conclusion reached, then they would have sustained that argument at this inquiry. They have explicitly chosen not to do so, despite having the expertise of Mr. Hegarty to hand. He clearly must have advised them that such an argument could not be sustained. The only party to take issue with that conclusion is the Residents' Association. However, Mr. Hayder accepted he has produced no evidence that the proposal would result in such impacts. Instead, what he provides is a list of criticisms from the sidelines upon which the Residents' Association have sought to mount their case. Notably, their case is not that the proposal would cause impacts under paragraph 116, but rather that without yet further modelling and evidence, they are not satisfied the proposal would not create such impacts. However, as the court remarked in the case of Satna Millennium, in the nature of transport modelling, one could always seek further data, validation and studies, and the time had to come when the decision maker is entitled to say that enough was enough. What all of this demonstrates is that different experts can come to different conclusions on what amount of modelling assessment may be necessary and appropriate. So what is the relevant question that you should ask yourself, madam, when applying paragraph 116 of the MPPF? In our respectable submission, madam, the answer is provided by the court in the above case at paragraph 109. Are you satisfied that the transport assessment and evidence is sufficiently sound such that there is no substantial risk that severe impacts would arise? So that's the test, not the test Muller and Friend sets out in his closing submissions. Are you satisfied that there is no substantial risk that severe adverse impacts would arise? The overwhelming weight of expertise involved in this appeal, the appellants, the local highway authority, the local planning authority, are all satisfied that the transport assessments carried out are sound, will be no risk, let alone a substantial one, of any impact arising under paragraph 116 of the MPPF. Therefore, while Mr. Hayder may disagree with the level of assessment work carried out and wish to see more detail or modelling, that alone is not enough. The question is whether the criticisms he puts forward are enough to meet the high threshold of demonstrating that there is a substantial risk that such impacts would arise. We submit that his criticisms come nowhere close to meeting this high test. Mr. Hayder raises several issues with the transport assessment work carried out by the appellant and approved by the local highway authority. For example, he contends that more detailed modelling work should have been carried out, the survey should have been conducted for a longer period of time, a different modal split should have been used. However, what he does not do is show or even suggest that any of this would have made any material difference to the outcome. In other words, that he would have shown there would be an acceptable highway safety impact or severe residual cumulative impacts on the road network. Mr. Frisby's proof of evidence and rebuttal addresses in detail each and every one of the concerns raised by Mr. Hayder and explains why the modelling and surveys are satisfactory and adequate as concluded by the Highway Authority. We don't seek to repeat all of those matters here and confine ourselves to addressing briefly the matters which were the subject of evidence in chief and cross-examination, and we begin with visibility displays. Mr. Hayder's original criticism was that northbound speeds were not measured in order to be able to calculate the visibility displays for the vehicle access point of Barkway Road. Mr. Frisby has confirmed that the speeds were in fact calculated in both directions using ATCs. To adopt a robust approach, the transport assessment uses the higher of the recorded speeds to calculate the visibility displays. Mr. Hayder's criticism then morphed into a complaint that a second ATC should have been placed further south to measure northbound speeds, and in the absence of this, the 60 mile per speed limit should have been used to calculate a visibility display of 215 metres. As Mr. Frisby explained, the ATCs were placed at the locations requested by the local highway authority, who are well aware of the speed patterns on Barkway Road. The appellant cannot unilaterally override the wishes of the local highway authority. Further, and in any event, Mr. Frisby explained that the 215-metre visibility display asserted by Mr. Hayder could be comfortably accommodated on the access point if the local highway authority thought that was necessary. Mr. Hayder then asserted for the first time in questions from you, madam, not even in cross-examination, where I could have challenged him on it, that a 215 metre display cannot be accommodated. He provided no reason as to why, if he truly believed this, he had not measured it to make good his point with easily attainable evidence. The changing nature of the criticisms regarding the visibility displays goes to show that no matter how much assessment is done, someone hired to criticize the work can find something to be critical about. That is why criticism alone is not to satisfy paragraph 116 of the NPPF. Concrete evidence needs to be produced to prove the level of impacts described in paragraph 116. The A10 gyratory crossing. Mr. Hayder recognises that the appellant submitted only a preliminary design of the crossing proposed. However, in his view, that nevertheless a road safety audit 1 should have been carried out for the crossing along with a detailed design review. He accepts that he's produced no evidence to indicate that the crossing would cause any safety impact. Rather, his criticism speculates about what would happen if the crossing cannot be delivered. Namely, he says it would undermine the wider modelling work carried out since it relies on deliverability of the crossing. Leaving to one side, madam, the point that no evidence is provided as to why it would be beyond the wit of the appellant and the local highway authority to upgrade a zebra crossing to a signalised crossing, Mr. Hayder is aware that there is a condition which stipulates that notwithstanding the design submitted, no above-slat works can commence without further detailed design being agreed by the local highway authority and the works being delivered accordingly prior to occupation of the development. Mr. Hayder was unable to explain why further modelling work is required in a scenario where the A10 crossing is not delivered, when the condition makes clear that the development will not be occupied unless and until the works are first delivered. Without the delivery of which there will be no impact to address and the development would not be occupied. The A10 gyratory traffic surveys. Mr. Frisby explained there were two sets of traffic surveys carried out for the assessment, and these were in December 2020 and December 2024. There is no guidance which suggests that traffic surveys must be carried out for a specific length of time. In this case, the appellant's 2024 survey was carried out on the 4th of December 2024. The survey period was accepted by the local highway authorities being sufficient and adequate, this being a period where there is no adverse weather conditions and sitting well outside the holiday season. Mr. Frisby has also explained his proof why a single day data set count is appropriate for a manual classified count, which was carried out in this case as opposed to an ATC, which may require averages to be calculated. Therefore, there's nothing in the guidance provided to suggest that somehow the surveys carried out were inadequate to represent the conditions near this specific site, and the local highway authority agreed. The planning authority take no issue with this either, as they do not raise this argument in their evidence. Mr. Hayder, for the first time in his rebuttal, produced a new traffic survey data using ATCs over a period of 6 days. However, there are two issues with this data. First, his traffic survey was conducted in the weeks following the Easter holiday, and thus contrary to the tag guidance for avoiding the weeks before and after Christmas Easter break. Second, in any event, all Mr. Hayder's evidence shows is that in some hours, traffic count is higher in the April season, and in other hours, it's lower. Without any modelling of the traffic survey data, it's impossible to show if this will lead to any impact on the road network, let alone severe impacts, and Mr. Hayder accepted that he provides no such evidence. Modelling, trip generation, and vision-led. The appellant adopted a modal split, which the local highway authority found appropriate, and Mr. Hegarty for the authority agrees is acceptable and represents the worst case scenario assessment. Although Mr. Hayder criticised the modal split used, he accepted that he does not suggest any alternative modal split to be used, let alone present any evidence that were a different modal split used, this would have resulted in any material difference to the outcome of the transport assessment. Mr. Hayder's criticism of the Barkway Road has not been modelled, and that this should have been modelled using microsimulation, goes nowhere. Mr. Frisby explained that firstly, there is no need to model Barkway Road because the fact that parked cars limit the capacity of the road is already evident in the assessment and fed into it. Second, even if one wanted to model Barkway Road, this cannot be done using either Lindsay or microsimulation, since modelling software packages focus on nodes, junctions, and not links, roads such as Barkway Road. Although the MPPF policy on vision-led proposal were not in place at the time the proposal was designed, Mr. Frisby explained how, having regard to the definition of vision-led in the MPPF, the proposal does comply with the policy for a vision-led approach, since it seeks to produce a sustainable and accessible proposal, and this approach was taken from day one. That vision is demonstrated in the master plan framework. Moreover, if you agree, Madam, that the proposal meets the policy test, local and national, for accessibility, it would, in our respectable submission, be a very odd decision to refuse permission because there's no piece of paper setting out what vision-led means and has been applied in this case. So by way of conclusion on that issue, we say there's no conflict with paragraph 116 of the MPPF and none has been made out by the Residents' Association. The third issue is the effect of the proposal on the Thurfield Heath triple SI policy. As per paragraph 193A of the MPPF, permission should be refused if the proposal does not avoid, adequately mitigate, or as a last resort compensate any significant harm to biodiversity. Paragraph 193P requires that the development on land outside a triple SI, which is likely to have an adverse effect on it, either individually or in combination with the developments, should not normally be permitted. The only ecology-related issue of this appeal is what effects, if any, the proposal will have on the triple SI. As Dr. Simpson noted, the test under paragraph 193B is more stringent than A. Therefore, if it's demonstrated the proposal will not have adverse effect on the triple SI, having regard to the mitigation measures offered, it would follow that the proposal would also comply with paragraph 193A in terms of impacts on the triple SI. Effects and mitigation. There will be no direct effects on the triple SI as the site is located 0.8 kilometres away from it. However, there's a risk of indirect effects through increased recreational pressures. These indirect effects are assessed having regard to the triple SI mitigation strategy are well understood. This is fundamentally different to the appeal decisions relied upon by the Conservators, since in those cases there were serious deficiencies in baseline information and a lack of evidence to demonstrate that a mitigation strategy could be devised that would in fact be effective. That cannot be said of the baseline information or the proposed mitigation strategy in this case. It's estimated the proposal could result in a 1.8% increase in visits to the triple SI. It's accepted that this small increase in numbers has the potential to give rise to a risk of adverse effect through increased recreational pressures on the triple SI. Therefore, mitigation measures are offered to address that potential risk of adverse effect. We turn to the recreation mitigation strategy. The only question we say for you, Madam Inspector, to determine is whether, having regard to the recreation mitigation strategy and the contribution proposed, this proposal gives rise to risk of adverse effects to the triple SI. The appellant has already proposed a mitigation strategy, which Natural England and the LPA have accepted can be appropriately conditioned at this outline application stage. Mr. Hall accepted that the mitigation strategy does not have to be agreed with the Conservators. Therefore, it's a matter for you, Madam, now to determine if the mitigation strategy proposed is adequate in ensuring that adverse effects will be avoided. Some of the key elements of the on-site mitigation strategy adopted include A, the provision of 10 hectares of green infrastructure in the appeal site, which is more than 3 times the requirement set out in the triple SI mitigation strategy. The provision of SANG, which will be designed according to the guidance set out in the triple SI mitigation strategy. Improvements to the east-west connectivity both within the site and using links adjacent to it, namely the link to public right-of-way 009. All of these measures are supported and accepted by Natural England and the LPA, and both take no objection to the proposal in terms of any risks of adverse impacts to the triple SI. Madam, I should just add there, if I could just ask you, that there is case law in support, well-established case law in support of the proposition that decision makers should attach substantial weight to the judgment of Natural England as the government's advisor on matters related to protected sites and biodiversity and ecology generally. Before considering the quantum of the contributions, we explain the mechanism under which any contribution may be spent. If you were to decide to grant permission and determine the quantum of the contributions, there is no need for further agreement to be secured from the Conservators. The Conservators are a Section 28G authority who are tasked with the maintenance of the triple SI. To say that they do not have to bear this responsibility is a fundamental failure to understand their role. The 28G duty is an ongoing duty which the Conservators are required to carry out. Failure or refusal to use any sums to maintain the triple SI and mitigate effects which you deem appropriate would put the Conservators in breach of their Section 28 duty. However, even if the Conservators refuse to carry out their duties, the Natural England and or the local planning authority have the power to use those funds to maintain the triple SI with or without the help of the Conservators. Therefore, Madam, if you are satisfied that there is a figure which is sufficient and adequate to mitigate any effects on the triple SI, you can be assured that those sums will be used to mitigate impacts to the triple SI by a statutory body, whether that be the Conservators, the Planning Authority or Natural England. The suggestion, now floated in the Conservatives' closing statement, that neither the authority nor Natural England can be trusted to carry out the mitigation is baseless. They are under a legal duty to do so, and legal decisions, such as the one, Madam, that you will be making as part of this planning process, must assume that people will act in accordance with their statutory duties and not in breach of them. We turn to the financial contribution figures. Dr. Simpson set out his method and reasoning in his proof of evidence for why the figure of £350 per dwelling is adequate to achieve the aims of mitigating any adverse effects to the triple SI as a result of the proposal. We do not seek to repeat the methodology and formula, especially given Mr. Hall accepted that the formula itself was suitable. However, we briefly respond below to the counter-arguments raised by Mr. Hall as to why the figure should be higher. Mr. Hall raised two issues. First, that some of the payments identified in Table 6.1 of Dr. Simpson's proof of evidence were calculated for 8 years rather than 10 years. Second, that the total number of dwellings calculated and delivered should be halved, since that is for a 20-year period, whereas the calculated costs are for a 10-year period. In response to the first, as Dr. Simpson explained, the timescales used were those adopted in the Triple I mitigation strategy, which planned till the end of the local plan period. In response to the second, Dr. Simpson explained it's difficult to estimate the exact rate at which dwellings may come forward in the plan period, and therefore halving the dwellings provided for a 10-year period is not necessarily an accurate reflection of housing delivery. Further, as Mrs. Else explained, the housing numbers are expected to increase significantly, approximately by 1,000 homes as part of the emerging local plan. Thus, the number of dwellings contributed to the mitigation fund will in all probability be significantly higher. Therefore, we do not agree with Mr. Hall's baseline assumption that exactly half of the dwellings will be delivered in the first 10 years, or that the total number of dwellings of a 20-year period will be no more than 3,800. However, Dr. Simpson, in his evidence, was keen throughout to take a precautionary approach, and having considered Mr. Hall's concerns, in particular having regard to the distribution of housing delivery over different periods, the appellant decided to continue that precautionary approach and has increased his contribution to £500 per dwelling in the submitted unilateral undertaking. This figure supports the calculation that was endorsed by Mr. Simpson in re-examination, namely, if you double the contributions, except for the one-off costs, in order to replicate the costs of a 20-year period, you apply the 20% uplift, divide the costs equally between 3,800 dwellings, this will result in 422.64 per dwelling. As explained, this headline figure is likely to be lower since housing delivery across the district and therefore Royston is set to increase significantly. Therefore, a £500 per dwelling contribution will comfortably cover the mitigation measures calculated using a 20-year cost assessment, and thus there is no reason as to why the contribution figures will not sufficiently help mitigate any adverse effects on the triple SI. A £1,000 per dwelling contribution estimated by the Conservators is without proper basis and formulation, as it simply relies on the case study example of land north of Baldock Road. As Dr. Simpson explains, there are key differentiating factors between this proposal and the case study proposal, such as the proximity of the site to the triple SI and the fact that this proposal provides almost double the amount of on-site sand compared to the case study. Therefore, a £1,000 per dwelling contribution is not proportionate to this proposal. That was the conclusion reached by the officers in the Planning Committee report. We note, Madam, that in its closing statement, the Conservators introduced a range of different calculations with different input figures, and not surprisingly, that changes the output figures. However, none of these figures are agreed by anyone. There is no endorsement of or justification provided for what the Conservatives would like to spend, and no certainty about the number of houses that will actually be delivered in the relevant zone. We note that the Conservatives have substantially cut the number of houses assumed in the equation, contrary to the evidence of Mrs. Else. But the simple and central facts, Madam, that we respectfully invite you to take away are, firstly, the Conservators now say they have no duty to carry out the mitigation and they will not be carrying it out. Secondly, they accept that the local planning authority and or Natural England do have a duty to carry out the mitigation. And thirdly, those who have that duty have agreed that the contribution is sufficient. Appropriate assessment. There were several other issues raised by the Conservative in the proof of evidence, which Dr. Simpson responded to in his rebuttal. Have a key point to note at this stage: there is no requirement to prepare an appropriate assessment, since the SSSI is not a designated habitat site requiring such an assessment under the 2017 regulations. Therefore, paragraph 195 of the NPPF is not engaged, and thus the presumption is not automatically disengaged due to the lack of an appropriate assessment. So, conclusion on that issue: for all the reasons set out above, the off-site mitigation strategy and on-site mitigation contribution taken together will ensure that there will not be an adverse effect on the SSSI. We then turn to issue number 4, whether any material considerations, including the provision of housing, warrant a decision other than in accordance with the development plan. Local plan. The proposal complies with the local plan read as a whole. We are not alone in holding this view. That was the view of the officers, and they came to that conclusion not once, madam, but twice. The only local plan policies identified in the local planning authority's reason for refusal are SP9, SP5, and CGB1. SP9 is a very broad design policy in how strategic master plans should be designed. There are several elements which make up that policy, including drainage, landscape, green infrastructure. The pertinent elements which the LPA take issue with are 9C1 and 2 and 3. As we've already explained above and agreed by Mr. Heckley, SP9 should be read in conjunction with SP6, since the latter which specifically targets sustainability and accessibility. We said that the proposal complies with both policies, and in particular, the proposal provides adequate opportunity for travel by non-car modes of transport, and thus SP9 is met as a whole, in particular parts 2 and 3. Further, as Mrs. Else explained, not only was it the LPA's own officers who reviewed the master plan and were satisfied with it, the plan was subject to further review by an independent design review panel who assessed it against the requirements of policy SP9 and fully recommended the master plan to the local planning authority. However, if contrary to our position, madam, you find that this proposal does conflict with SP9, that conflict cannot be determinative. It has to be considered in the wider planning balance, as was accepted by Mr. Connell. Turning to policies SP5 and CGB1, these make up the second reason for refusal. Mr. Connell accepted that without reason for refusal 1, he could not realistically defend the LPA's case solely based on reason for refusal number 2. That concession, in and of itself, tells you, madam, what weight can be given to the breach of settlement boundary policies SP5 and CGB1 in the planning balance. In the face of a crippling housing shortage, settlement boundary policies such as SP5 and CGB1 frustrate the ability to deliver housing, and that problem cannot be solved other than by substantially reducing the weight one attaches to such policies. Mr. Connell accepted that reasoning, but sought to argue weight should remain at more than very limited. His reasoning was founded on the premise that the policies were new and adopted recently in the local plan. However, he was not able to explain why newness was a relevant factor in assessing what weight should be given to local plan policies. Whether the failure to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply arises from a plan which is 20 years old or 2 years old makes no difference to the outdatedness of those policies. The local planning authority's planning officers must clearly have agreed with that assessment in principle, because they concluded that the proposal accords the development plan as a whole, notwithstanding the conflicts identified with policies SP5 and CGB1. This is supported principally by the overarching policy SP1, which sets out the guiding principles for how development should be delivered across the district, and this proposal complies with this policy, and no party suggested otherwise at this inquiry. Therefore, the proposal complies with the local plan read as a whole, and planning permission should be granted as per section 38(6). If that should be the 2004 Act, I believe, rather than the 1990 Act. If contrary to the above submission, you find, madam, that the proposed conflicts with the development plan, it's necessary to turn to the Tiltree balance under paragraph 11D2 of the NPPF. The main parties being agreed that footnote 7 does not disengage the Tiltree balance in this case. The mere fact that there may be harms are not enough, nor is it enough for harms to simply outweigh the benefits. It must be demonstrated that the harms are of such a scale that they significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the proposal. Now, for ease of reference, we've set out a table What we say are the benefits and harms of the proposal and the weights afforded to each of them, so that you have hopefully something that you can helpfully turn to in terms of what we say, at least in terms of the full list of benefits and the weight accorded to them. So I pick it up again at page 28 under harms, sustainability and accessibility. Had the local planning authority taken a reasonable and practical approach to this proposal, just as its own planning officers did, it would have concluded that the site was sufficiently accessible, and as such, no harm could be attributed under this heading. A substantial amount of time of this inquiry was spent looking at whether specific routes were compliant with LTN 120, whether a gradient may be too steep for walking for some. However, these matters must not be viewed in isolation. As Mrs. Else pointed out, the gradients for cycling are not the only consideration when assessing whether a site is sustainable and accessible. In her 25 years experience, including working in local government, it's often the case that sites have to be brought forward to meet needs when all one can rely on is one adopted highway connection. The site, on the other hand, has 3 public rights-of-way, Barkway Road, and several internal connections proposed. To suggest, as the residents did, that somehow these non-car transport modes had to be more attractive than the car is, once again, setting an impossible threshold and cannot possibly be the proper and reasonable interpretation of either national or local policy. All the appellant can do is to seek to provide adequate opportunity for travel using non-car modes, and we say that this proposal clearly does that, and such there's no conflict with the NPPF, including paragraphs 109, 110, and 115. However, even if there was some harm arising from the fact that those walking or cycling will have to tackle an incline along the route, it's necessary to decide what weight to attach to this disadvantage. Attaching the highest negative weighting of substantial demonstrates a lack of perspective. If we accept Mr. Connell's assessment, there would be no difference between this site and another parcel of land in the middle of nowhere with no access to bus stops, cycleways, or pedestrian routes. That simply cannot be logical, as demonstrated by Mr. Connell's inability to answer this proposition in cross-examination. Other harms. For the reasons we have already set out above, we say there's no evidence of conflict with paragraph 116, and you can be confident that there is no substantial risk the proposal would give rise to adverse impacts under that paragraph, as agreed between the main parties. We have also already explained why breach of settlement boundaries policy should get very limited weight. As for the 2 other harms identified, Mrs. Else and Mr. Connell accepted that the landscape harm and loss of agricultural land do not give rise to policy conflicts, but are simply harms which go into the planning balance. Each party attaches their respective weights to these harms, and it's you, madam, to determine how your own weighting of those harms. Benefits. As shown by the table above, the list of benefits is far longer than the list of harms, and many of those benefits are accorded a substantial weight. And in respect of the key benefits, madam, such as housing and affordable housing, the weighting of substantial is a matter of agreement between the planning witnesses. The full scale of benefits have been set out above. However, there are some specific substantial benefits in this proposal which we submit should be recognised as separate benefits. Mr. Connell accepted that he does not give open space any weight in its own right and sees it as part of the overall development. The public open space provision amounts to almost 50% of the area of the site itself, and act as a benefit not just for the future residents but also current residents of Royston, and help reduce effects on the SSSI. Doing otherwise would mean there would be no difference between this proposal and an alternative which had no public open space provision with it. Mrs. Else also rightly explained why landscape and open space are different benefits, since the latter seeks to create public accessible space for people to use. In terms of ecological benefits, the site is seeking to provide a 25% biodiversity net gain, despite the fact that it is not subject to even the statutory 10% BNG requirement. Thus, it should be categorised as being a substantial benefit. In addition, the proposal delivers the east-west linkages sought by the Thurfield heath mitigation strategy, thus further protecting existing ecology. And just pausing there, ma'am, I'd like you to note, if you could please, that that is not dependent on the works of improvement. That link is provided through our site and would link with the existing public right-of-way. The proposal will also undoubtedly bring forward notable economic benefits given the sheer scale of the proposal. The future resident scheme will be a major contributor to the local economy, generating approximately 23 million in gross value addition. These are only a few of the benefits with the full scale set out in Mrs. Elsie's proof of evidence table 1. Even if it were to be accepted that the site suffers a disadvantage in terms of non-car mode accessibility because of the grading along Barkway Road, this harm, and madam, this is important, this harm, regardless of whether one categorises that harm as minor at best, which would be our view if our primary case of no harm is rejected, whether we categorise that as medium harm, as per the local planning authority's planning officers, or substantial harm, as per Mr. Connell's evidence, it is not a harm that comes close to outweighing the benefits of the proposal. Even on a flat balance, the harms, having regard to the loss of agricultural land and landscape and visual harm as well, come nowhere near outweighing the benefits of the proposal, and certainly not in a tilted balance. So by way of a conclusion, ma'am, for all of the reasons set out above, we respectfully invite you to allow this appeal and grant planning permission for the proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So before I close, did you send through, there was a judgment that you had wanted to, has that been sent through to Mr. Brown? Yeah.
British Rails Board, and we'll it's either been sent or will be sent.
Okay.
It's certainly been shared with the parties.
Okay, great. And just to confirm then, I will be awaiting the signed and dated section 106, the UU, by 5 p.m. on the 3rd of June 26, and the council will provide their response to the costs application by 11 a.m. Friday 22nd May, and the appellant will provide their final comments on the costs application by 4 p.m. on the 22nd of May. Okay, and I believe there's nothing else except to thank you all for your contributions to the inquiry. The inquiry is closed.